that's available that we give a future asset for, that we see a window of 3, 4, 5 years, or that we control for that amount of time. And then it's up to us to sell them on why they want to extend. That's something we'd explore. Offer sheets are out there too. I think there's a perception or a thought that offer sheets are taboo by managers. Offer sheets that don't work are taboo by managers. Cap has gone up and a lot of that money's already been spent by the teams already. Now, if you have an RFA or that in a comfortable spot, it's at least my job responsibility to assess, is that an option that we should explore?
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. That was Doug Armstrong, Alex, 2 months ago, talking about the potential of the St. Louis Blues going out and offer sheeting a player. Maybe a multiple player situation here.
What?
And 2 months later, that is exactly what happened. All these general managers, Alex, are in their cabins somewhere trying to just enjoy themselves, a nice summer vacation. We know how this works. Basically, after the draft, the NHL goes silent until training camp, except for Doug Armstrong. Doug Armstrong said, I woke up feeling dangerous. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of moves. So, first thing we woke up to today, he made a trade that seemed kind of strange given the timing of it, where he's like reacquiring his 2025 second-round pick from the Penguins. What's going on here?
Did anybody else have anybody else have the Brian Windhorse me moment? Now, what could Doug Armstrong be doing?
I just assumed he wasn't happy that he gave away that pick because BK kept questioning him about the Kevin Hayes trade. And he's like, you know what? BK's a hockey guy, so let's just go get it back.
That was my first thought as well. It turned out that wasn't the case. He wasn't just trying to prove me wrong. So he gets his second-round pick for next year back. And then a little bit later, it's announced that the Blues are tendering offer sheets to Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. These are two restricted free agents for the Edmonton Oilers. Now, if you haven't paid attention, you've been underneath a rock, Edmonton's in a really tough spot right now when it comes to their cap sheet, Alex. It's why they have not re-signed Broberg and Holloway. They'd like to. They're good young players, former first-round picks. One's a defenseman, the other is a forward. Broberg was really good for them in the Western Conference Finals and in the Stanley Cup Final last year.
Yep.
Holloway, somebody that they want to build around moving forward. They're like the only two young players they have in the organization to be able to build around. So the Blues go out and say, you know what? We don't think you're going to be able to at least match one of these. Hopefully neither, but we think that you will decide on one or the other, so we're going to at least go out there and tender both of them. That's my read on it, at least. The offer to Broberg, 2 years, $4.5 million. The Blues, if the Oilers decide not to match, would give up their second-round pick for him. The offer to Holloway is a 2-year deal worth $2.3 million per year. That would be a third-round pick as compensation. All right, Alex, I think that is the background that is necessary for this conversation. What did you make of this when you saw the news this morning that Doug Armstrong decided, I'm going to be the one that breaks the seal and actually goes out and tenders a restricted free agent from another team?
The first thing I thought of when I rolled over was suck it, Craig Button, because you guys remember when we had him on and he was like, what, are there trades in the first round? Well, no. Well, there were a lot of trades in the first round. Are there offer sheets handed out? Well, there's the 2 offer sheets for you. So take that, Craig Button. I still love you, by the way. This was about as aggressive of a move as you can ask for Doug Armstrong. I was really surprised that both of them got the offer sheet. One of them wouldn't have surprised me because Doug talked about it multiple times of like, we have the salary cap space to weaponize going after other teams with offer sheets. We thought it was Martin Necas, maybe it's another centerman, but we didn't look at the defenseman side of things. And Broberg was always one of those guys that everybody that I had spoke to, whether it was Mark Spector, who covered the Edmonton Oilers, a couple of other commentators in TSN, had always said Broberg's got potential, but Edmonton just keeps burying him in the AHL. And so a guy who is not in their top 4 plans with the next 2 to 3 years, because you've got Evan Bouchard and Matthias Ekholm, and now they're in cap hell. So the way that Puckpedia put this together up on their website, because we all miss Cap Friendly so much, they put it up to where the offer sheets, they just assumed the offer sheets that were given to Broberg and Holloway are accepted by the Oilers and they're a part of the Oilers. That would put them $7.2 million over the cap space. And if they put LTIR on Evander Kane, well, then that just means you're still $2 million over cap space. They've got Draisaitl to figure out. I don't believe they're going to be able to re-sign Philip Broberg, and then Holloway might just be an extra. But what this does to me, my first thought was, well, this just expedited the retool because you've now filled the hole on your defense because, in my opinion, Broberg is an upgrade over Scott Perunovic, Pierre-Olivier Joseph, also Torrey Krug. And then Dylan Holloway just adds more young weapons to a roster that has a lot of forwards right now. So you made your team better, in my opinion, by these two moves. It's just a matter of, will Edmonton match one of these offers?
My biggest takeaway from this had little to do with the 2024 roster and everything to do with the guy that's putting it together. Because, I don't really know how much this changes your outlook for 2024. Frankly, you might be worse by doing this. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but these guys are very young. I have no idea what they would look like in bigger roles this year than what they've been in the past, but I don't really care about any of that. For me, what matters is that Doug Armstrong and or Alex Steen, because I would assume Steen has to sign off on a move like this for it to take place.
Oh, it's another Swede, BK. Of course he's going to sign off on that.
The aggressiveness with which they operate is just different, man. It's different. Yep. When you look across the way and you look at what the Cardinals do and the way that they operate, well, we've got a specific parameter of the type of guy that we want to bring into the clubhouse, and we've got certain contracts that we're just not going to go out there and do, and we do this, we don't do that. It gets exhausting, man. There's 3 different lanes that they can go out there to upgrade their team. They don't really have a significant market internationally in the past. They don't make the kinds of moves that Doug Armstrong is willing to make. This is a big move, dude. This is the kind of move that very few general managers are willing to make in the NHL. And yet, Army said, you know what? We're in a unique position. We said it all offseason. Alex Ferrario called this. He said this, I think it was in May or June, where he was like, hey, this team is in cap hell. These 2 players are RFAs, and both of them make sense for what the Blues need. So you called this from the time that we got to Jump Street with this offseason. But then we talked to other people around the NHL, and they're like, yeah, offer sheets aren't real. They don't actually happen. Don't get your hopes up. Don't get excited. That's not going to happen. But we kept looking at it. We're like, but the Blues are in the perfect position to do something like this. They don't have a lot of long-term money on their books. They don't have a lot of young players that they're worried about blocking necessarily. They are in a bit of a retool right now. The future picks, whatever, because you could go out there and get former first-round picks, which is better than having to wait as long as they would for future picks if you just kept everything made sense about making this kind of move, but on the outside, people said it's not going to happen. I love when Doug Armstrong goes out there and makes aggressive moves like this, Alex, especially when they make sense for the team. And you look at it, these both make a lot of sense. So I respect him targeting the Oilers, who are in cap hell right now, and he knows I can pick on this team, and they will probably have to choose one of 2, and I'm happy to take whichever one they decide not to bring back. It's a smart move, it's an aggressive move, and it's the type of move that I wish the other team in town would do more of.
Well, and that's just the biggest thing. I know you get frustrated at times, BK, because people go and say, well, Armstrong's got a lot more faith than Mo, and we talk about how they're very similar in the sense. The one thing is, this move signifies, and really this offseason signifies, Doug is not wanting to be in this retool any longer. Think of what this offseason has been. You re-signed Pavel Buchnevich. That was one of the biggest questions. Was this going to turn into a rebuild if they trade Buch? You do this whole potential injury with Torrey Krug thing, and who knows what's going to happen. You bring in Ryan Suter. You make trades for guys to bring in cap space and help those other teams out, but they're depth pieces. And then you go out there and you offer sheet 2 players that fill holes on your team. That's the part that I think is so important with this move. You didn't just go out there and bring in a left-handed defenseman. You brought in a guy who's 22 years old, who has top pair potential, and has just never been given the opportunity. Oh, by the way, he was given the opportunity in the Western Conference Final and the Stanley Cup Final, playing top 4 minutes, and he was a plus 11 after those playoff series. This is a guy, I've talked Shea Theodore so much. I've talked Jacob Chikrin so much. The hope is that this guy can turn into that. I texted you guys earlier today, and I said, I've got a comp for Philip Broberg. Look at what Florida did with Gustav Forsling. Gustav Forsling was claimed off of waivers because another team was like, nah, we're just not there with it. Philip Broberg could be a guy that Edmonton's like, look, he's not a top 4 defenseman for us. We'd like to keep you as a third pair, but I'm not going to pay a third pair $4.8 million. The Blues said, we'll pay a top pair player $4.8 million, and let's develop him. So I just – the reason I feel that Doug Armstrong is always so aggressive is because he's not happy where he is. And he realizes that 2 years is way too many for this retool. So let's see if we can at least taste the playoffs this year. And by the following year, like BK just mentioned, for 2025 and beyond, that's where things start to get a lot more impressive because you've tried to eliminate this retool conversation.
And the nice thing about this, when you bring in these younger players, they're on 2-year deals. So it's essentially, okay, it's a 2-year tryout. If it doesn't work and Broberg doesn't become this top guy that you're talking about, well, it's easy to get out of it. You know, it's not you're not stuck with a 6-year contract, for example. So that's what I love about this. You bring in 2 guys that fit the timeline, that are younger, that can kind of help the team a little bit next year, also accelerate what you're looking for in the future. And I sent this in our group text when this happened. It feels like there's a whole bunch of parts that the Blues have, and now they just got to sort through and figure out what they have. This offseason has been about bringing in a bunch of pieces. You know, Bolduc and Dvorsky, it's tough to see the route for them to get on the roster, but you know what? We talk about the Cardinals. If they're going to go on a run, they're going to earn it. Same with Dvorsky and Bolduc. They make this team opening night. They did a hell of a job at training camp to end up getting a spot.
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. YouTube chat off and running today, youtube.com/101 ESPN STL. Somebody on the text line said, guys, would you be able to explain exactly how this offer sheet works? Not quickly, but yes, I will do so as quickly as I possibly can. Essentially, the Edmonton Oilers are in cap hell. They have no real way of making significant moves. So they had 2 players, Philip Broberg, Dylan Holloway. One a defenseman, the other a forward. Former first-round picks, they have reached RFA status, similar to what you saw with Blues defenseman Scott Perunovich. Scott Perunovich also had RFA status, so the Blues are able to either tender him a contract and he accepts it, or they have to go to arbitration. In this scenario, they had not come to terms with these 2 respective players. So they can go out and look for deals elsewhere. And if they end up signing deals with another team that matches whatever it is that is their asking price, the Edmonton Oilers have 1 week to match those deals. If they decide to match those deals, those players will remain in Edmonton. They can match one, they can match both, they can match neither. If they do not match the deal that the Blues have signed these respective players to, then they will get a draft pick compensation commensurate to what the money is that the Blues are willing to pay. So for Broberg, it would be a 2nd-round pick. For Holloway, it would be a 3rd-round pick. That is essentially the way this operates. This time next week, we will have an answer by then on what Edmonton has decided to do with these 2 players. But their hands are tied. There's not a lot of flexibility in Edmonton for what they can do. The overwhelming likelihood is, at best, they can retain 1 player. They can decide between Broberg or Holloway because of what's going on with their cap sheet right now. But they, over the course of the next week, can try to maneuver around things, try to open up some money, and if they do, maybe they could retain both. It's highly unlikely. It seems as though, Alex, at least one of these 2 players will be a Blue this time next week going into Blues training camp.
And I've seen a lot of people that say that it's hard to believe that they would let Philip Broberg walk because defensemen are so important and he had such a good postseason over Dylan Holloway. I've seen people say Dylan Holloway because you don't have a lot of young forwards. I'm not so sure they re-sign any of these guys because Edmonton is not just in cap hell now, they're in cap hell in the future. Like Evan Bouchard is going to be making $8+ million in a couple of years. Leon Draisaitl is going to be asking for 12 to 13, and then Connor McDavid's going to be saying, cool, I'll take 14 to 15 million dollars. And nobody's coming off of the books with the exception of a couple of guys here and there. So as much as you want to keep a 22-year-old forward or a 22-year-old defenseman, you've put yourself in this position. And if they're going to re-sign somebody, it would be Dylan Holloway, in my opinion, because you can make $2 million work for 2 years. $4 million for a 3rd-pair defenseman, I'm not so sure Edmonton's going to do that. And if you're a Blues fan, you need to cross your fingers, toes, whatever you need to do that Philip Broberg doesn't get matched, because that's the guy, if you're a Blues fan, you want, because essentially you're trading a 2nd-round draft pick for a top 10 pick of a defenseman. Remember me talking about trading up to get a defenseman this year in the top 10? Well, you're essentially getting one who's 22 years old with the 2nd-round draft pick.
With 3 years of development. I think that's the most important thing here is you're buying time more than anything else. Because if you draft a player, you're talking about 3-4 years before they really hit their prime. Well, guess what? These guys have already had that time to develop in the AHL, to develop in the NHL. One of these, I mean, they just played in the postseason, man.
Yeah.
They have seen
The
what
Stanley
it looks like
Cup
at the
final.
highest possible level, and they've gone up against teams that you want them to go up against here in St. Louis. So there's a lot of reasons to be excited about moves like this. The downside is as follows. When you make a move like this, it is possible that the team retaliates. We've seen this in the NHL. Who was it? It was Montreal and Carolina, right? That had that back and forth.
Yep.
So
The Blues did this too back in the day. Army did an offer sheet to a Vancouver Canucks player, and then the Vancouver Canucks did a offer sheet to David Backes.
So that's the downside is you could have a team that comes back and says, okay, Jake Neighbors next offseason, in this case, Edmonton, looks at Jake Neighbors and says, okay, he fits perfectly with what we want. We're going to give him this massive offer sheet, and you're not going to want to match it. Here's the problem. They can't do that because they don't have any money. So the downside that typically exists by operating this way probably doesn't for the Blues with this specific team. So it's a brilliant move by Doug Armstrong. Love it in every possible way. Couldn't be more excited about the possibility.
BK, the Edmonton are in this position that the French called "les screwed." And the Blues are capitalizing. You're welcome, T-Bone.
That's
That's
Alex,
French.
T-Bone on
That
BK.
wasn't
Coming
good.
up in about
Come
15
on!
minutes or so, we're going to get into some college football. Would you rather make the SEC championship this year or miss it with the same record? Might sound crazy. Alex certainly views it that way. We'll explain why it might not be coming up in about 15 minutes. But next, the Cardinals offense is broken, and we'll tell you about it here on 101 ESPN.
That's the difference, and it changes the overall vibe and momentum. When you put yourself in a situation to score there, you load the bases with 1 out. During this stretch, we're gonna play some good teams, and we're gonna have to do a better job of executing with runners in scoring position. It's just gonna be the key to our success moving forward. So we put ourselves in a situation where we could have changed the game a couple times and weren't able to.
That was Ollie Marmol last night. Audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest. Cardinals lose 6-1 in game 1 of this series in Cincinnati. That's not one you wanted to drop. You've got Sonny Gray on the mound. You're on the road in Cincinnati. You're getting ready after this series to go up against the Dodgers, Brewers, Twins, Padres, Yankees, Brewers, and Seattle Mariners. This was not a game that the Cardinals could afford to drop going into Cincinnati last night. And yet, that's exactly what they did. There will be a lot of focus on Sonny Gray, and we will certainly talk about him coming up at the 12 o'clock hour. It's understandable. Alex, to me, this team was always going to go as far as their offense was capable of taking it. And their offense has been abysmal for the vast majority of the season. I came into the season saying, hey, they could be 2013
2004. Oh,
best offense that we've seen for the Cardinals, and most diverse offense that we've seen from the Cardinals since 2013. That was on the table for this team. They have not been that. This year, they're 19th in Major League Baseball in slugging percentage. They're 19th in OPS plus, 23rd in doubles this year. They're 22nd in home runs. They're also 22nd in stolen bases. To put this in context, Alex, they're bottom 10 in basically every offensive category, specifically in doubles, homers, and stolen bases. So you don't have power and you don't have speed on the bases. The only other team that can claim that, bottom 10 in Major League Baseball in homers, doubles, and stolen bases, is the Detroit Tigers. Your offense does nothing particularly well. You don't have any one thing that you can point to and say, hey, we're good at this. This is how we're going to beat you. The Reds, for example, really good at stealing bases. They don't do a whole lot else well, but they run like crazy on the base paths. They have a clear and coherent identity as an offense. Alex, Cardinals don't have that. And barring something unforeseen, barring something changing dramatically in the final 50 or so games of this regular season, they're going to have to change this up in the offseason because what they constructed didn't work. It failed spectacularly. And it reminds me of what we've seen in Toronto, what we have seen in Seattle. Those teams built up a young core with some veteran players. It didn't work, and now they're having to figure out, okay, what do we do now? How do we change this up? How do we reconstruct this on the fly? That's where the Cardinals find themselves right now with this offense.
Yeah, I mean, they're stuck. And I don't know if you can get out of this easily. This isn't a let's go to the free agent market and fix this, because to me, the roster of the offense feels a lot like a retool to where you've got these younger players that you're hoping can become the main pieces, but right now you're still relying on the veterans. You're relying on Goldschmidt, Arenado, and Wilson Contreras. Well, Wilson's been hurt. Goldschmidt and Arenado have not been good. They're starting to fall back to earth from what they previously were. And so now you divert to, well, let's look at the younger guys. They're supposed to provide the pop. This is their moment to pass the torch and carry the Cardinals offense. And they've done a really good job of it. Let's not take that away from them. Mason Wynn has turned himself into a star. Brendan Donovan has been very consistent. Alec Burleson has been very consistent. But all of these guys, I don't believe, have that star power. They don't have that we can carry a team and be the big pieces for your offense. That's Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman. And the development of those two guys have hit a standstill. And that's why it just feels like you're in the middle of a retool, but the Cardinals are unwilling to admit they're in the middle of a retool. So they're still trying to compete with Goldschmidt, Arenado, and Wilson Contreras. But everything else around them has been the reason that they've at least kept their head above water. But it's hard and unrealistic to expect that to keep going for 162 games because these are all younger players.
I get that to an extent, but some of these guys should be taking the step forward. And that's where I am with it. Like Newpar should be moving forward, and he's taking like 3 steps back. Nolan Gorman should be continuing to build upon where he has been as a player. and he hasn't. He took a step back. Walker, he's the young guy, so he falls a little bit of the exception to this. But again, he took a couple steps back. Really, the only young player that's taken steps forward were Wynn and Burleson. All the other young guys have taken steps back, and the old guys, well, they're old, so they've fallen off of the cliff in their power. And Goldie and Arenado, they don't slug, and that's their biggest issue as an offense. And it's why, to your point of like, if this is how this offense is, and there's no reason to believe this is going to get turned around in the final, what do we got, month and a half left in the season, they're going to have to do what I would call a Jerry DiPoto type offseason, where you're going to see them make a bunch of moves, and you're going to have to look at the offense and go, did we really get better? But it's different pieces. You just got to shuffle the chairs on the deck a little bit and see if it fits a little bit better, because this offense is not good enough to do either A, make the playoffs, or B, go on a run in the playoffs, because they don't hit for any power, and they have a lack of a clutch gene and do not hit with runners in scoring position.
Yeah, but like we can say that, but who are the different pieces? Like, you're not moving on from Wynn, you're not moving on from Donovan, you're not moving on from Burleson. Yeah, you're moving on from Goldie. You're not going to be able to move on from Nolan Arenado. Wilson Contreras is still here. It seems the Cardinals refuse to move on from Gorman. You're really moving on from what? Lars Nootbaar and Michael Ciani?
I think Gorman is absolutely one of the players that they could consider moving on from. Nootbaar could be one of them as well. I think you have to be open to everything this offseason.
I think Donnie's on the table. I mean, as much as we talk about Donovan being like the Swiss Army knife and as a guy that's
he
consistent.
didn't come through last night.
Brendan Donovan's 2% above league average. So it's not like he's a guy that's 20% above league average that you can't move on from. Like, he's on the table as well, if you're being honest.
Alex mentioned something about the retool. I think they have admitted with their moves that they're in a retool right now. They didn't go out and spend prospects capital at the deadline. They went out last offseason and signed a bunch of dudes to like 1-year deals with player options or team options, essentially. Like, they can easily just overhaul this thing. Derek Gould wrote about that a lot in the offseason, about how, okay, it's interesting. They can kind of flip this thing if they wanted to, either at the deadline or in the offseason, into what is essentially a rebuild or a youth movement, whatever you want to call it. And so this offseason, like, if this thing goes the way that it appears it's heading right now, one thing that I would be in favor of at this point is just going full youth movement. And that doesn't mean rebuild. That doesn't mean tanking to the bottom of the standings the way that the Royals, the Astros, the Cubs, those teams have. No, just let Paul Goldschmidt walk. Do what you can to move on from Nolan Arenado's money. That probably means eating some of it. And that means trading a future Hall of Fame third baseman. So be it, man. You got to try to do that if you can. That means probably moving on from Miles Michaelis. However you can move on from his money, you probably got to consider doing it. That means letting Lance Lynn walk. And yes, a lot of this is your veteran leadership that you held to such high regard this season. Tough. Maybe it's time for the young guys to take on some of those leadership abilities. Maybe Brendan Donovan can be that guy long-term inside of that clubhouse. Maybe Mason Wynn, now that he's had a full season of being this version of himself, can hold other guys accountable. Maybe you bring in a guy like, I don't know, Tommy Pham to a 1-year deal worth a couple $1 million, and he serves in that role for you, instead of paying $60 million for Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt to be in that capacity. I think it's time to seriously consider that. There's a legitimate chance, Alex. There was a piece about this earlier today over from Kent Rosenthal on The Athletic, that the Cardinals could finish below 500 for the second year in a row. The last time that happened, where the Cardinals were under 500 in full 162-game seasons in back-to-back years, was 1959. It's been more than 60 years, man, since we've seen this kind of ineptitude in back-to-back seasons, potentially, if they end up falling below 500 again. If that happens, you got to go full youth movement. It's time. There's no more piecemealing this thing together. It's time to look in the mirror and say, we are not good enough as currently constructed. They're already going to have financial limitations anyways. What we are witnessing right now, if it continues going down this path, is the beginning of the end of whatever this core group of players was supposed to be.
I agree with you, and if I could be honest, I think you're a year too late to that. I think you should have done
but
the
you
full
had to
youth
try.
movement
You had to try, man. This past offseason, you had to try to piece this thing together while you still got Goldie Arenado and all these young players.
I would have preferred to see those young players just get the shot rather than try and rely on Goldschmidt and Arenado for one more year, where you saw it fall off, and you saw it fall off last year quickly. And you were trying to piecemeal it together to fix your pitching, because your pitching was the part that was so bad.
And to be fair, they kind of did. The
They
offense
did.
is what's failed them this year. The pitching
But
has
your
basically
offense-
met expectations.
But your offense wasn't good last year either.
But
your
it was
offense,
hurt. The reason why I think you had to try is because the offense was hurt last year. And you had Jordan Walker, and it hasn't worked, obviously, this season. But Jordan Walker, I think all of us expected to take a pretty significant step forward this year. Nolan Gorman, I think all of us were pretty excited about him coming into this season.
Tanner was.
Yeah, I predicted 40 home runs.
Internally, they were excited about Alec Burleson, and they were right. Internally, they were excited about Mason Wynn, and they were right. Internally, they were excited about Lars Nootbaar, and they were wrong. Like, they had a lot of reasons to believe that this offense was going to be better in 2024. Ivan Herrera had high hopes for him. Wilson Contreras, certainly were excited about him not having knives in the back this year compared to what he did at this point last year. So, like, I think it was reasonable for them to believe that it was time to try to keep pushing with this roster, but now they tried. They gave it the old college try, and this offseason, one of the things that is helpful for them, I would say, is you could even tender Lance Lynn a contract this offseason and trade him. Somebody would take on that deal. Kyle Gibson, you could tender him a deal and trade him if you really wanted to. You could trade Sonny Gray this offseason. I don't know that that's what they should do. They could. Somebody would take on 2 years, $60 million for Sonny Gray. That's a really good deal for that guy, man. You could probably trade Nolan Arenado if you're willing to eat some of the money. Like these are contracts. These are players that have some value on the trade market, and the Cardinals could essentially go out there and just overhaul their roster completely and go full youth movement next year if that is the route that they were willing to go.
Yeah, and I didn't mind the fact that they decided to run it back this year because you're right. I think they had a top 10 offense, if I remember correctly, before the injuries hit and they waved the white flag in August, and it's why we were so high on it. You know, if the offense looked last year what it's looked like this year on top of that bad pitching, that's when I would have agreed with Alex and said, okay, it's time for the full youth movement because all the pieces aren't working. Last year it was clear. Okay, they didn't have enough pitching, so what happens if you try and upgrade that? Well, they went out, they signed the ace in Sonny Gray, who has been a little underwhelming, but we'll talk about that a little later on. And you signed Lance Lynn and you signed Kyle Gibson, and the pitching has been better. Now, granted, low bar to clear from last year, but it has been better. The bullpen has been better compared to last year. What none of us really saw coming was just this unbelievable fall off from the offense where a lot of the young guys don't take that step forward and the old guys end up hitting their wall in Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado.
Yeah, that's my thing is I just did not expect them to be this bad offensively. And I know many on the text line told me that I shouldn't have been as optimistic as I was, and that's fair, I suppose. The Cardinals were as optimistic as I was, probably more so. With this offense
sense.
going into the season. And they believed that this was going to be the year that it came together. And there were legitimate reasons to believe it. You could call them crazy, but they were real. And this year it just has not come together. And so now you have to determine, okay, what's the next course of action for us? And I don't know what it's going to look like, but as of right now, and last night was just the latest example of this with more runners in scoring position issues. Alex was right about everything with this Cardinals team, and it pains me to say that. This team stinks with runners in scoring position, man. 11 for 79 with runners in scoring position in the month of August. 11 for 79. With the bases loaded in the last month, they're 2 for 17. They had one home run, and that was the Tommy Pham home run that he hit. It's just, it ain't working.
That's why when you get pre-mad at me when I talk about how I don't care about the get in the playoffs and anything can happen, not with this core. I've seen this core in the regular season that in a big moment, they crumble. They burrow. They don't know how to come through with a big moment other than a guy like Tommy Pham. Occasionally you'll get the big hit, you'll get the big moment, but more times than not, even in the regular season, we're talking on August 13th about a game against the Cincinnati Reds. Brendan Donovan had runners in scoring position and wasn't able to come through. You don't have the core that can come through in big moments. So to your first point, you want to fix this runners in scoring position problem? You're going to have to do a overhaul of players because right now this core doesn't know how to hit with runners in scoring position.
The Cardinals have a worse, not just worse, they're twice as bad in run differential right now than they were at this point last year. Last year they were minus 26 at this point. This year they're minus 53.
And if they get in, this is going to be the Washington Capitals. It's going to be like, hey, they got into the playoffs. Oh, wait, we lost in 2 games.
The only teams in Major League history, in the last 70 years, so modern baseball history, that had a run differential as bad as the Cardinals do at this point in the season that ended up winning at least 85 games, so which is what it's going to take to get into the playoffs this year, if not more. 85 plus wins the last 70 years with this bad of a run differential at this point in the season. 2017 Twins, 2009 Mariners, 1978 Orioles, end of list. That's the company that the Cardinals are trying to keep. Somebody on the text line said, but BK, you told us that we should be optimistic. You told us that this was a good team. No, I told you this is a bad National League and this is an above average team. I was right on the bad National League. I was wrong about them being above average. They are merely average and maybe below average. And that's where we've landed right now at this point in the season. I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. I don't like it. I don't like admitting when I'm wrong. But I was wrong about the 2024 Cardinals. With Alex Ferrario, Tater Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, is this going to be the year that the SEC and Big Ten decide, you know what, not worth it for us to have a conference championship? We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN.
Terry Hendricks, Near Day Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Busy morning for St. Louis Blues GM Doug Armstrong, as earlier this morning he reacquired the second-round pick that was in the Kevin Hayes deal in 2025 with a pick swap with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then he signed two Edmonton Oilers to offer sheets, defenseman Philip Broberg and forward Dylan Holloway. We'll continue to talk about those signings with our Blues insider Jeremy Rutherford coming up at 12:15 today here on the show. And the Cardinals lost to the Reds yesterday 6-1. They're back in action tonight. 5:40 will be first pitch. Eric Fetty will get the start for St. Louis, and Hunter Green will be on the mound for Cincinnati. This Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
All right, Alex, I asked you a very simple question earlier today. You said, "Are you trying to make me look stupid?" I said, "No, I would never do such a thing."
Okay.
But I want to go ahead and have this conversation on air. Alex, would you rather, if you're an SEC team, be 10-2 and make it to the conference championship game, or be 10-2 and be one of the teams out? Now, let me present this scenario for you. Let's say Georgia finishes the year 12-0, right? They're undefeated. And then you got three teams in the SEC that finish at 10-2 right behind them, and one of them ends up winning the tiebreaker, right? Would you rather be that team that wins the tiebreaker and plays against Georgia in the SEC championship game, or be one of the other two teams that just finishes the year 10-2, you're sitting at home the week of the conference championship, and then seeing what happens from there? Which would you prefer this year in the 12-team playoff era?
I mean, this is probably going to backfire on me, but I think I'd rather be the team that gets to go to the SEC championship game. I don't understand the premise of, hey, you want to go to the championship game? Hey, would you like $1 million? Or I could give you this bag of change that I found under my couch. Which one would you like? Take the $1 million.
So the reason why I ask it is because I'd rather take the opposite side. I would not want to go to the
course you
SEC championship game in this scenario. Like, let's say
Why? Because you don't want to lose to Georgia?
Correct. If you're Mizzou, and my situation is like, okay, Mizzou, LSU, and let's call it Alabama, are all 10-2 this season. And they get to the end of the year, and for whatever reason, Mizzou ends up having the tiebreaker on those two teams. They go to the SEC championship game. Bama and LSU are sitting at home, right? They're 10-2, Mizzou 10-2. Mizzou goes to the SEC championship game, loses to Georgia. They're now 10-3. Bama and LSU, I believe, is where the teams that I said are still 10-2 because they didn't have to play another game. Missouri now has 3 losses. Which of those teams do you think is going to be left out of the college football playoff now with 3 losses sitting at home while the other 3 SEC teams end up in the college football playoff? There's, let's say, 3 or 4 teams from the Big Ten that end up in the college football playoff. You're going to have a group of 5 team, Notre Dame potentially in. Now you've got the other Big 12 and ACC teams that are also in. You're on the outside looking in suddenly because you played in that SEC championship game. I think this is one of the under-the-radar storylines of the 2024 season is how the college football playoff committee will view those championship games.
So you're telling me that if you go to the SEC championship at a 10-2 record and you lose to Georgia in the SEC championship, that you could potentially fall out of the playoffs because you lost 3 games?
Correct.
It doesn't take into consideration the fact that you just played in the SEC championship game. You could fall out with the expanded playoffs.
It sounds crazy, except for the fact that I watched this happen to Mizzou in 2007 when Kansas ended up in the bowl game in the Orange Bowl over Missouri because Mizzou lost to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game that year. Like this would not be the first scenario. Now it's different. This is the college football playoff. It's 12-team expansion.
It's expanded.
As opposed to then it being a BCS game that Missouri was left out of because Kansas ended up jumping them to play. I think it was Virginia Tech at the time in the Orange Bowl, and that should have been Missouri. Missouri was ranked ahead of Kansas going into the Big 12 championship game that year because they beat them in that Armageddon game at Arrowhead. But then, because Missouri lost to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, Kansas jumped them in the standings and ended up going to the Orange Bowl ahead of them. I think this is something that teams are absolutely going to have an eye on. Somebody on the text line, by the way, said, I think it's hilarious that you think that there's going to be 4 teams that end up with 10 wins in the SEC this year. Okay, let's go back to last year, for example. in the SEC last year, teams that are now in it, teams that had 10-plus wins: Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Ole Miss, LSU, and Oklahoma. That's 6. Now, if you want to take out Oklahoma and Texas because last year they were in the Big 12, cool, do so. That's still 4 of them that ended up with 10-plus wins last year in the SEC. This is very much on the table. This scenario that I'm describing, it could even be worse than what I'm telling you about right now, where there are like 4 or 5 teams that win 9 to 10 games, and the team that ends up in the SEC championship game gets left out because they played in it. That is a very real scenario that teams are absolutely worried about right now. And it's going to be under consideration for the future of, should we even have these games? Does it make sense for us to play a conference championship if we're the Big Ten or the SEC when our teams are just flat out better than these other conferences that are playing right now?
Yeah, and we've seen this. This isn't a first-time thing either. I mean, you mentioned the Mizzou example. Look back to 2022. USC has 1 loss going into championship weekend, and they go to the Pac-12 championship. They lose to Utah. Ohio State, who sat at home because they lost the big game to Michigan, gets into the playoff ahead of them. I think there was an argument to get rid of conference championship games back then in the 14 playoff because it just didn't hold that. It didn't hold an effect to where you were benefiting sometimes from sitting at home. And I think you're really going to see that now because the field is expanded. Now, I understand the counter argument a little bit of, well, Tanner, if Mizzou beats Georgia, they get a bye.
Almost did.
They get a
Sure,
bye
there's
because
still
they have
value
SEC,
in it.
but there's so much more on the negative side.
Absolutely.
You know, like if you were saying that it was a tie between 2 one-loss teams, okay, I'd hear a better argument for it. You know what? Yeah, go play in that SEC championship game because if you win, you're now a top 4 seed. You're getting a bye 100%.
But
go,
you don't
go
get to,
for it.
you don't get to find out beforehand. That's
Exactly.
the thing that stuff. Like,
If you're a 2-loss
you won't
team,
have that
though-
information until the end of the year.
Yeah, if you're a 2-loss team, no way am I going to be backing out of that. And if you look at Missouri's schedule, because we're using them as the example here, there's a chance like their schedule is not a compelling one in terms of their resume by the time we get to this point. So like if they have 2 losses, let's say they lost to, I don't know, Alabama and we'll say
Oklahoma, let's say.
Oklahoma.
At home.
Sure.
So
And
they beat
let's
Texas
say-
A&M on the road, and that's their one quality victory
and
from the season.
Let's say A&M's not ranked by the time you get to the end of the season. Okay, well, now you are at a point where if you do lose to Georgia, there's nothing to look at your resume as a
Exactly.
3-loss team and say, well, here's why we belong in the college football playoff.
Especially if
But
it's a
he's gonna
bad
laugh.
loss. If you lose by like 3 touchdowns in the SEC championship game, weird stuff happens, and you lose like 21-42. People are now going to look at that and be like, well, you had your shot. You went up against one of the best teams in America, and you had your opportunity to prove to everybody that you were a legitimate threat. And instead, you lost to Alabama, you lost to Oklahoma, you lost by 3 touchdowns in the SEC championship game. Why do you deserve to go to the college football playoff over these other teams that didn't have that opportunity in the SEC championship? If I had to place a bet today, Alex, my bet would be the SEC after this season does not have a conference championship game anymore. I don't know how specifically the TV contracts work with this, but whenever they can get out of their TV deal for that conference championship game, I think the Big Ten will probably do the same thing. I do not believe that those 2 conferences, now that they have 16 teams in them respectively, will have a conference title game anymore. I think it poses too much risk and not enough upside.
I agree. I don't know if we see conference championships beyond this year.
I think we'll continue to see them. And the biggest reason you said was those TV deals. Man, they are so sweet. Well, because college football, man, they really care about not having money pouring in. It's why the Pac-12 is not a thing. I can't see them moving away from conference championships. They don't care about how it hurts resumes. They're going to get paid. And that's what they really care about. So I would be
College football
shocked.
playoff, though, is where the money really is.
Sure, but you still can make money off of a college football champion or a conference championship. If you can make money off of it, they're going to do it.
Yeah, I think you'll get because of the schedule format, the way that it is right now, they're making money hand over fist. They could just, hey, we're going to get an extra conference game now. Like that's going to be the change. We're giving up the conference championship, adding in an extra conference game for SEC. So now, hey, ESPN, you got one more conference game for every single team. That means more chances to see Alabama versus Georgia, more chances to see Texas versus Texas A&M, et cetera. That's going to be the move.
I like your optimism.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is optimistic.
No, it's not. I just love the segment of BK talking Mizzou like, I don't want Mizzou to be good enough to get to the SEC championship.
I can't see them moving away from that. In fact, I would think it's more likely they would add a conference game while keeping the conference championship because it's more money. I don't see them moving away from it.
What I'm saying is they want more money for the playoff.
I get what you're saying.
The playoff is how they get the money. That's where the real money is at. That's why they expanded it the way that they did. I don't think that you're making enough from the conference championship right now to make up for what it is potentially taking away from you by one of your teams getting bounced from the playoff by participating in that specific game. So
that's why we're going to 16-team playoff soon.
Exactly.
What
He's Alex
about?
Ferrario, that's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. At about 12:15, we're going to talk to our friend Jeremy Rutherford about the Blues moves, what they did earlier today. But coming up next, quick questions and answers here on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers here on 101 ESPN. All right, let's start out with this from the 501. Guys, would you trust John Mozeliak to start a rebuild process this offseason, or would you want them to make the change now as the president of baseball operations if that is the direction they're headed? The latter. I would want them to go ahead and make the move now.
Yeah, you don't start a rebuild with John Mozeliak, who's not going to be here. When this whole thing is going to be in the middle of it, you start a rebuild fresh. You basically clean a house and you start with a whole new staff of a rebuild.
The one scenario where I could see it is if they decided, you know what, it's probably a bad look for whoever the next president of baseball operations is, Heimblum, to go ahead and make these moves now. Let's go ahead and have Mo make the moves with his name on it. And then, like, opening day of next year, make the announcement, hey, this is going to be the end. Mo is now handing over his decision-making processes to Chaim Bloom. He's going to be the next president of baseball operations. We're going to spend this year transitioning between John Mozeliak and Chaim Bloom. I could see something like that, so that way Mo is the one that, you know, trades all of the brand name players with his name attached to it, so those don't come back to bite Chaim Bloom moving forward. That would be the one scenario where I could see it making sense.
Maybe you could trade Nolan Arenado for Mookie Betts. You
Probably.
know? Redeem yourself, Chaim.
Who says no?
Obviously, the Cardinals.
Yeah, too talented.
Too good of a lever.
I can't imagine Chaim Bloom. He's got to be sweating bullets right now going, oh, please don't name me next year Pobo. Yeah. Please don't name me Pobo next year. I know we're going to have to tear this thing down.
Randy Flores is like, I'm good as the scouting director. Just leave me alone, please.
From the 636, what percentage chance would you give it that Lars Nootbaar is not here next season? I would say 50-50 right now.
I'm with you.
I'd probably go 50-50.
From the 314, guys, do you think that Dylan Holloway will eventually be your Brandon Saad replacement? Let's assume that he's the one that ends up coming here to St. Louis for this question, Alex.
Yeah, I think that's a good comp. I was texting with Ryan Smith, the Thunderbirds play-by-play guy, who, of course, sees the AHL, and that's where Holloway played. He said Holloway's got speed, he's got a shot, and he's not afraid to go to the front of the net. So sounds a lot like Brandon Saad. I just don't know what he is because we've only seen him as a fourth liner. You don't know until you put him in a top 6, top 9 role if he plays there. But on this team this coming year, he's not going to play there. But, yeah, it's a bigger picture he could be.
From the 618, BK, where's your conductor hat? We're thinking about doing something for that.
I want to light it on fire.
Yeah, we're thinking about burning it.
Update TBD, but...
Yeah, it's BK's fault.
It's still in the studio.
End of the road. We're going to be singing End of the Road by the end of this month, and BK is going to be the reason why.
The end of this series, potentially, depending on what happens over the next 2 days.
Like when they lose tonight?
Yes.
Like when they lose tonight and then get swept by Cincinnati?
All right, last question here. Alex from the 314, if the Blues were to get Broberg, do you think that he would play top pair minutes with Colton Parayko? How do you think he would fit into their pairings defensively?
I think Leddy and Parayko are your top pair moving forward. I mean, they played like a top pair last year.
Can I make an argument that they shouldn't be?
You can make an argument. I don't see them breaking that pair up right away. I think if you're asking me the following year, Broberg and Parayko are probably your hopeful top pair defensemen because Broberg's 6'6", I think he is. He's a big dude, so he could be up there. I just think right away you're not playing him up there. You're probably playing him with either Matt Kessel or Justin Falk, and then Leddy and Parayko are going to be that sturdy pair. And then consistently because you're not going to want to put Broberg at 22 years old out there against the top pair. You're going to want him to get second pair minutes, which that's the growing process. And then the hopeful by the next year, you're talking about him playing with Parayko.
We'll talk more about this with Jeremy Rutherford coming up in about 10 minutes or so with Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, we got to talk about Sonny Gray. That was a rough start for him last night once again. There's one thing that is going wrong consistently for Sonny Gray. Not sure totally how he fixes it, but I do want to ask you guys, do you think he's exceeded, met, or underwhelmed relative to expectations so far in his first season as a Cardinal? We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN. With Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley. We got to tell you about how you can win millions of dollars this year in Circa Millions and Circa Survivor. Alex, people right now are taking some trips out to Las Vegas, getting ready for the season. And while you're there, you got to go over to Circa. They have Circa Millions, $6 million in guaranteed prizes. You pick 5 teams against the spread each week. The winner's going to take home $1 million, $6 million in guarantees. And then Survivor. This is my personal favorite contest that they're putting on this year. $10 million guaranteed to the winners. It's $1,000 per entry. You pick one team straight up every single week to win. And if you get to the end of the year, you're the last one standing, you're winning potentially millions of dollars with Circa Survivor. Circa Sports, the app is ready to go for you over on the Illinois side, Alex. People have got to get out there to Las Vegas as well. Get involved. Circa Millions and Circa Survivor.
It just makes the football season that much more exciting with Circa Sports Illinois. Whether you're doing that Survivor pool that BK's talking about, or if you're just making futures bets or just day-to-day parlays, you know this is my parlay season where I'm going to be making those big parlays over on the Circa Sports Illinois app. They don't limit players based off of their winnings. They've got the tight money line splits. They tell you to go check out other sports betting apps because they know that you'll be back. So download it today. Get with Circa Sports Illinois. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
With Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. So I got a question for you guys. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved. The YouTube chat off and running today. YouTube.com/101 ESPN STL. I posted this on Twitter at BK Sports Talk. Sonny Gray now has a 3.9 ERA on the season. Gave up 3 home runs last night. That was ultimately what did him in, and that's been a problem for him all season long. 3.9 ERA on the season. He is 40th among qualified starters in ERA. He's 38th in innings. He's 5th in among qualified starters in strikeout rate, top 15 in walk rate in a good way. He's not walking very many batters. And top 30 in batting average against. If you guys look at some of the underlying stuff, man, he's top 20 in both fielding independent pitching and in wins above replacement. Sonny Gray has been, by most standards, pretty good. But he's given up a ton of home runs. He's given up on the season 17 home runs. He only allowed 8 last year, Alex. So I asked a question. How would you currently assess his season? Has he met expectations? Has he exceeded expectations? Or has he been below expectations compared to what you thought coming into the season? How would you rate his season thus far, Alex?
Man, that's tough because, like, you separate them, and in the first 14 starts, you look at it, and I'd say that exceeded expectations because, like, you're talking about a dude who had a sub-3 ERA, ton of strikeouts, kept the games close, was giving you innings, and then the last 8 games, you're talking about like a 6 ERA, who has not been the number one for you. I think if I had to bundle both of these together, I would say he met expectations for me. He didn't exceed them because if he would have exceeded them, we'd be talking about him in a Cy Young conversation. That would have exceeded my expectations for Sonny Gray. That would have been an ace. And he's not underwhelming my expectations because he's not a liability every time he's on the mound. Now, these last few times he has been a liability. Something's up with Sonny Gray, but there's always those sprinkled in where he gives you 6 or 7 innings of 2 runs. He's got the strikeout numbers there for you. So underwhelming to me would be a guy who's just a complete bust and I don't want him on my team anymore. And that's not the case with Sonny Gray. He has been somewhat of a stopper for you. So that's where I think I would fall and say he has met my expectations. I expected a guy who was pitching at the top of my rotation that can be a stopper for you when things go bad. And I think the team has won like 13 of his 22 starts that he has played in. So that, to me, has met expectations with Sonny Gray.
If I would assume if Randy was asked this same question today, he would say that it's been a success.
Exceeded.
Because he's 11-7 last year, and he was 8-8 last year as a starter. So his win-loss record is actually significantly better than it was. It's the first time that he's won double-digit games since 2019. He's a winner this year, as opposed to in previous seasons where he's been average to below average in that regard.
T-Bone.
So I would say for that specific criteria, he's actually exceeded expectations in a meaningful way.
Tell me if I'm wrong. That sounded like a tone. That was a tone problem.
It was very much a tone problem, but a very targeted
that was sarcasm.
tone problem.
Yeah, that was a targeted, sarcastic tone. And don't be a jerk.
I don't know where the squirt bottle is, but I would
The funny thing is Randy's been right about so much when it comes to Sonny Gray. So I had to find like the one thing that I could pick at. Otherwise, I don't have a lot that I can point to here. T-Bone, how would you assess his season thus far?
I think he's underperformed what expectations were. To me, Sonny Gray solidified he's a 2, and I don't think he's an ace. Like, I think the Cardinals are still searching for an ace, and it's two factors
wasn't that always
for me.
The case? You thought that coming into the season as well. That
I thought he was a 2, but I thought there was a chance that, like, okay, maybe he's just been overshadowed. Like, to me, you don't finish second in the Cy Young and not be considered an ace, and it turns out you do. Because a guy that's almost got a 4 ERA is not a 1. Like, let's just be honest. That's why, like, I wasn't a fan of Aaron Nola in the offseason. He's a guy that can float around a 4 ERA.
But you know there's more to it than just the ERA.
Sure, I agree with that, but he's getting clobbered with home runs. And I think the thing that bothers me the most, and the reason I would say he's underperformed expectations, is there's too many ebbs and flows in his season right now. You know, when I thought about bringing in Sonny Gray, I wasn't expecting him to have a 2.79 ERA. I didn't expect that. But could he be like a 3.35 ERA and a guy that just, like, I feel like I'm riding the pine every day. Like, I know when Sonny Gray takes him out, I'm getting 6 innings. It's going to be like 2 earned runs, and he's going to have strikeout stuff. Only thing I can say is you're getting the strikeout stuff. I don't know if he's going to have a great outing. Last night wasn't a great outing. I thought his stuff looked the best it's looked all season. He gave up 3 home runs.
But the previous 2 starts were really good. Yeah,
sure, but
runs.
It's too inconsistent. You know, he's gone through stretches where it's like, man, Sonny Gray looks awesome. And then there's like 3 or 4 starts, and him speaking publicly of, you know, I don't know about my preparation. I'm like, okay, that's alarming to me. As a guy on a 3-year deal is supposed to be leading a staff, and he sounds like he's not committed at this point. I don't know.
Unfair. I don't think that's what he was saying. I think he was saying that
I think he's underperformed his contract. I think he's not the guy as a number 1 starter to lead a rotation.
His contract isn't a number 1 starter.
So,
his contract is as a mid-rotation number 2-ish.
To say that he has been at expectations to me is not fair. I think he's underperformed this season. It's been disappointing.
Wholly. I think he's been exactly what expectations should have been this year for Sonny Gray. He has a home run problem right now. There's no doubt about it. He has allowed this season 27 runs on 17 homers. Last year, he allowed a total of 10 runs on 8 home runs. Now, to put this in context, Alex, if you can't do this and you shouldn't do this, but this is speaking to why his fielding independent this year is so much better than his actual ERA. If you pulled out the home run balls, just all of the runs that were scored via the home run, last year you would have had a 2.3 ERA. This season you would be at a 2.1. So
home runs don't matter.
They do, because they count, because those runs are going against him right now, and it's why he has an ERA that's approaching 4. It's why it's so bloated. But what I'm saying here is his home run rate has exploded in a way that I don't think anybody could have foreseen, and frankly, I don't expect it to be the case again next season, because it has been low in the past. I think that Sonny Gray has met expectations because every other underlying number, and I can't be a fraud here. If I say that, like, if the Cardinals go out and trade for a guy like Tyler Anderson, I would say that's a bad move at the deadline because everything other than ERA suggests that the guy that you were going to be getting after the deadline is worse than what his ERA indicates. It's the opposite for Sonny Gray. If Sonny Gray was a free agent this offseason or was available via trade, I would be shouting from the mountaintops the Cardinals should go acquire this guy because everything suggests this guy's going to be better in the future than what he was this season. Yes, his ERA is close to 4, but look at everything else. Strikeout rate as high as it's ever been in his career. Walk rate down as low as it's ever been in his career. Home run rate bloated for a 1-year sample size. You should expect that to regress in a way that is a positive thing for him as a pitcher. I think Sonny Gray has been the guy that you expected him to be, while also acknowledging it has been a bit of a rocky road. Started out with an injury, not great. Ended up in the middle where he's making those comments. I didn't love hearing them. I think they have to take him out too early because of him, not necessarily because of Ollie sometimes. That's frustrating to watch throughout the course of the season. But overall, if Sonny Gray was back next year making $25 million, I think you should expect him to be a mid-3s ERA, and that is absolutely worth that contract. That's what you pay for a guy that performs like this.
Well, and the one thing that we were clamoring for all offseason was more swing and miss stuff. You needed to get more swing and miss stuff. And, I mean, Sonny Gray has brought that for the Cardinals. Now, he's brought the home run ball as well, but it's so hard because, yes, he is not an ace. He's not even like a number 1 right now. He is, like T-Bone said, in my opinion, he's pitching like a number 2. But he still has been a stopper for the Cardinals at times. Has it been consistent? Absolutely not. And that's why he has not exceeded my expectations. He's met my expectations.
Agreed.
But he still has done what the Cardinals needed him to do. Provide swing and miss stuff. Give them a chance to win almost every single time he steps on the mound. There are other things about Sonny Gray that I don't like, but I could have said that about any other pitcher you could have gone out there and signed. We said the same thing about Jack Flaherty. There are things about him that you just don't like. Remember Carlos Martinez? There were things about him you just didn't like. If we would have gone down the path as Cardinals fans of Blake Snell, it'd be fun right now, but we would be pissed for the last 3 months prior to this. So I look at Sonny Gray as a fix to the Cardinals' problem, but their problem is bigger than just Sonny Gray.
Sonny Gray's not an ace, and ace wasn't available. They went out and got the next best thing, which is probably a number 2 starter, and now they have to go out this offseason and decide what their next course of action is going to be. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. We got Jeremy Rutherford, Blues insider for The Athletic, joining us next here on 101 ESPN. With Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It was a big surprise to all of us that we woke up this morning to Blues news, and I think the same was true for Jeremy Rutherford. He's the Blues insider for The Athletic. He's on Twitter at JP Rutherford, and this is typically the time of the year where JR is trying to find kind of human interest stories, and instead, JR, you got a legit transaction this morning. How you doing today? What'd you make of the news this morning when you woke up and the Blues had offer sheeted multiple players from the Edmonton Oilers?
Yeah, Doug Armstrong with the hammer today. He said, guys, I'm still the GM of this team for the next 2 years, right? Is what he said. No, by the way, do have some summer-type pieces coming soon, but not today. Not today. Today is the big day with the offer sheet. And I just turned in my story, a revised story with a lot more thought that should be up at The Athletic momentarily. And in it, I say that, yes, we are surprised, but we shouldn't be surprised because Doug Armstrong did mention earlier this offseason that offer sheets were going to be something that he would explore. And that's not typically something he comes out and says. When you talk about buyouts and offer sheets, I've been covering Doug Armstrong since he joined our organization 2008, took over as GM in 2010, and he just doesn't often come out and say those things. So that kind of stuck with me earlier this offseason when he said, yes, we would explore it. If we can find a player, a team that's in a predicament, maybe we can take advantage of that situation. That's definitely the situation with the Edmonton Oilers and these two players. They're up over the salary cap now. Two young players in Broberg and Holloway who could help you. Both young, just like the Blues have been talking about for the past couple of years with this retool, 23 and 22 years old, and they can't help them. Now we just sit back and wait and see if Stan Bowman, the new GM of the Oilers, decides to match.
Yeah, JR, when I saw both names, like the Philip Broberg one didn't surprise me because it's a left-handed defenseman that has fallen out of grace in Edmonton. Dylan Holloway, I was a little surprised that Doug went after that one too. But when you look at both options, does it feel like Philip Broberg is the more critical one that the Blues really are hoping follows through with them?
I think so because you're looking at a defenseman with some size, and he's a first-round pick from just a few years ago, 2019. And then when you look at the Blues situation, yes, they have 8, 9 defensemen on one-way contracts, but I don't think that's anything that's going to stop Doug Armstrong from making a move like this. If he finds somebody who he thinks can be a part of this organization for a long time. Now, granted, it is a 2-year contract in terms of the offer sheet, but if you get the player in here, Broberg, maybe he's a guy who can grow with your nucleus and just 23 years old, could be here a while. So, yeah, that was the name that kind of struck me. And he's obviously a name that, I've been talking to the Edmonton writer for the better part of a year now. I think we even included Broberg's name in a piece one time, and Holloway as guys who could be available if the Edmonton Oilers run into a crunch here, and that's their situation. So Broberg, if they don't match, he could join your nucleus here on the left side of the defense, and then obviously the Blues are going to have some numbers that they're going to have to sift through in camp.
JR, how would you handicap this thing? What do you think? And I know that's early. This news just came out earlier today. The Edmonton Oilers have a week to determine if they're going to match one, neither, or both of these contracts that the Blues have tendered to their respective players. But how would you handicap it as of today? Do you think it's likely that the Blues get at least one of the two?
Okay, so let's state the facts here, which I'm sure you guys have already gone over. But I was right, and so I missed what you might have said. But right now, with those two players, the Edmonton Oilers are about $7.2 million over the cap. And as people know, you probably know you can go 10% over the cap in the summer as long as you're down to the $88 million cap at the start of the season. So they're within that 10%. They can match both of these players and still be within that 10% and then figure the rest out later. However, as we'll explain in the article, and I roped in Daniel Nugent Bowman from The Athletic, our Edmonton writer, to explain it from the Oilers' perspective. It's a tough juggle for Stan Bowman to be able to make this happen financially on that end. Yes, you have Evander Kane, who could need surgery and miss the start of the season, and go on LTIR, but that's only about $5-point-some-odd million relief. And then also you have a situation where, he comes back, you're going to have to find a way to fit him in the salary cap. So that's not a long-term solution, even with Kane. And then you have a couple players, Brett Kulak and Cody Ceci, who have no trade protection. So it's not like you can just take a couple smaller contracts, maybe guys who don't mean anything to the roster, a roster that went to the Stanley Cup final last year, and say, okay, let's move these guys. They got no trade protection. So, you try to handicap. I think there's a decent chance the Blues could get one or both, but these are both players that Edmonton is looking towards helping them for the future too, and it's going to be tough to pry them away. They're probably going to explore every option they can to move somebody else to keep these young players, but I think they're going to find that really difficult.
Well, and the part for me, too, JR, is just looking at the roster. Like, the Edmonton Oilers went out there and spent money on Victor Arvidsson this offseason and Jeff Skinner this offseason. So, they've got more forwards now. And you're talking about paying a Dylan Holloway, although he is 22 years old, paying him $2-something million to play on the fourth line. And the Broberg one, Broberg got the opportunity in the playoffs, but that's because of the Darnell Nurse injury. He's viewed as a third-pair defenseman for them. And if you're Stan Bowman, and not just the salary cap crunch now, but with Leon Draisaitl next year, and then Evan Bouchard, and then Connor McDavid, I don't know if he can afford to pay a third-pair defenseman $4 million for the next few years.
No, you're dead right on that. They do have other players that they brought in this offseason, and when they signed all those players, you thought to yourself, wow, they're bringing in a lot of money, and are they going to be able to keep these players if they do get offer sheet? I think that was kind of the thought around the league, and now, in fact, it's happened. So, if you're Edmonton, it would make some sense to allow them to move on and not pay these types of salaries. But I just go back to even though these players right now haven't necessarily made their mark in Edmonton, and maybe they're not top 4 defensemen or top 6 forwards, they're still young and they're recent first-round draft picks. And essentially, you'd be moving a 2019 first-round pick, 8 overall, and a 2020 first-round pick, number 14 overall, for just a second and third-round draft pick. We talk about asset management here in St. Louis. They need to do the same thing. Unless they're ready to move on from these young players and they don't see something in terms of them being a big part of the future, then perhaps they do allow them to move.
JR, one quick follow-up. Let's just go down the hypothetical path that they do get both of these guys, both Holloway and Philip Broberg. Do you believe that this Blues team is better this season?
Yeah, I think marginally, and I think that's the case that Doug Armstrong's been looking at for probably a better part of a year or 2 years now with this Blues team. Like, you look what they did in free agency and at the draft, and you talk about sending a Kevin Hayes to Philadelphia. I think each of these moves that they made, bringing in a Matthew Joseph, bringing in a Pierre-Olivier Joseph, all these things add to the depth and make you marginally better. I do think, though, that bringing in a Broberg, especially with his age, 23, I think he's a guy who could come in and maybe be your best move of the offseason, obviously outside of re-upping Pavel Buchnevich. I think that's the type of player who could come in and you'd say, okay, now that's something considerable. But in terms of, does this put the Blues back in the playoffs next year? I don't think if the Blues get both of these players that's necessarily going to be the case. They're depth players. You're hoping that they're going to continue to develop and be the type of players that you're looking to get when you make this offer sheet move. But I just think it makes them a little bit better, and then you'll have to count on them to continue to develop and make you a better team down the road, not necessarily next year.
Jeremy Rutherford is our guest here on 101 ESPN. You can find his work over at The Athletic and on Twitter at JP Rutherford. Alex, you had something else?
I was just going to tell him to shut his mouth, saying they're not a playoff team. Come on, Jeff.
Well, and let me be clear here. I'm not saying they're not. The stance I'm taking right now with this Blues team is the exact same. 90, 92 points. There's going to be some games that determine what they can do. I think they should be in that wild card mix. I think they are, with the group of moves that they've made this offseason, a little bit better than last year's team. But obviously you can't afford to lose to the Chicagos, the Columbuses, the San Joses of the world. And there'll be a focus on that, I'm sure, this season. And if they can win those games, then I think they can be a playoff team.
Are you talking about the Blues or the Cardinals? Because I felt like we could have just replaced a couple of those names and it would have been applicable to the Cardinals as well.
White Sox, Marlins.
Right. Whoa.
Yeah, hey, you ain't wrong. Reds, for example. Final question here from me, JR. Is there anything else we need to know about these moves, what it means for the Blues' current roster, what it means for the young guy? What else do you have on the news from today that you personally find to be interesting or intriguing?
Yeah, well, it's just the left side of the defense mainly. Let's look at this. I think that I was the one that asked Doug Armstrong the question probably a month ago. It said, "So are you done? Is this the roster?" And he said yes, unless we can improve the team. That's always the caveat, right? And I think he's made about 4 or 5 moves since then when you talk about Ryan Suter and some of these other things. Of course, there's the situation with Torrey Krug. And by the way, guys, I mean, when you talk about bringing in a Broberg, does this further point to, Torrey Krug not being available? We'll have to continue to monitor that situation. So, BK, to answer your question, I'm going to look at the defense, and I'll probably expand on that in an upcoming article, see what this means if you do bring in Broberg, how he fits in, who he plays with, and who could be the odd defenseman out. Or now we're talking 2 or 3 odd defensemen out.
Jeremy Rutherford is one of the best in the business. You can find his fantastic work over at The Athletic, and you should be following him for days like today where Army comes out and shocks us all with 2 big moves in the early portion of the morning at JP Rutherford. JR, appreciate the time as always, man. Thanks for joining us on short notice. We'll talk with you again soon.
Thanks, boys, and congrats, Alex.
Thanks, JR. Appreciate it, buddy.
Jeremy Rutherford joining us as always here on 101 ESPN.
He was congratulating me for the Blues Stanley Cup coming this year. That's what he was congratulating me on.
He was congratulating you on getting this correct, calling the Holloway and Broberg
Guys,
moves.
the Ferrario 5 is always working.
Well,
always working.
You do 25 of them a year, so yeah, eventually one of them does hit.
Yeah.
He was congratulating you for being right all along about the Cardinals and their rotation, being right all along about the runners in scoring position woes, being right about the offense, being right about Miles Michaelis. Can you be wrong every once in a while? Damn it!
This show should be called BK and the Right Guy. No.
Can I have my name on that show title or no?
Absolutely, T-Bone.
thanks, man.
Absolutely. You're the right guy, too. Technically, we'd be the right guys. BK's just himself because he's always wrong. Like, literally.
Yeah.
2004
it's a really
offense.
frustrating role to have.
Yeah, it is.
Serve it.
I never said... So, can I go through one
No
thing
matter what
real quick?
offense
Sonny Gray being an ace.
So, I went through last night because... I went down a rabbit hole, guys.
Do you remember when I said trade Nolan Gorman for Logan Gilbert, and you're like, no, don't do it?
I said you can't trade that left-handed power. You just
Yeah,
can't do
you
it.
can. What's that power looking like right now, T-Bone? Does he have 40 home runs yet?
Well, he's halfway
getting
there
there.
almost. Okay, so the Cardinals this year have not hit a lot of home runs, as you probably noticed. They have 122 home runs, speaking of left-handed power, through the first 119 games of the season. At this point last year, how many home runs do you think they had? They have 122 home runs through the 119-game mark this season. How many do you think they had at this point last year? A BK game, classic.
How would you say 122 now?
They have 119, or yeah, excuse me, 122 through the first 119 games this year.
And how many did they have last year?
Yep.
I'll go 130.
140.
166
I almost said
at
150.
this point last year.
Felt too much.
Now, this is the Cardinals' home runs by year from 2010 to 2015. 124, 125, 98, 82, 104 at this point in the season. So basically, they have recreated the 2010 through 2015 offenses. Here's the difference. In those seasons, they had 75 more doubles at this point in the year than the 2024 Cardinals. So they were winning in other ways. They had other ways to beat you. The Cardinals have essentially recreated the early 2010s offenses that they had in terms of the home run power, lack of home run power. They were 13th in the National League in 2013 in home runs. The difference is they had a boatload of doubles. They had some speed. They came through in every clutch situation, crazy runners in scoring position numbers. So like all of the stuff that this team does poorly, that team did well. They both didn't hit home runs, but those teams did other things well, and this team does not. That's the thing, is like they're trying to recreate something that is not modern baseball anymore. You can't win the way that the 2013 Cardinals did in 2024 because it's freaking hard to hit. It's so hard to string together hits.
And the problem is you were winning because of the elite bullpen, but as I said, you played your playoffs in April and May and June to bring yourself back from the dead. And at that point is when that bullpen got used to the point where it's like, uh-oh, now we're not going to have these guys. And now you just can't get back to it.
So anyways, I went down a rabbit hole last night. And
That was a sad rabbit hole.
it essentially led
your
me to
rabbit holes
believing
are
that
sad.
this team is bleeped. Like they are
My rabbit holes. My rabbit holes are typically like, the players that the Blues can acquire to make them better. Your rabbit holes are why this team stinks still.
To be fair, Martin Ferk didn't really help.
Hey, he's playing in Germany right now.
Good for him.
Got some news for you.
What?
Blues news?
No. Missouri news. Political news, honestly.
What?
Missouri.
No, thanks.
What? No, whoa.
Coming up.
Yeah, coming up next, the junk drawer, probably.
So two things have been announced. Missouri voters will decide whether to overturn the state's abortion ban. We don't have any thoughts on that. In addition to that measure, though, the part that is important for a sports talk show, Missourians will also weigh in on sports wagering this year on the ballot box in November. That has officially been approved by the Secretary of State. Today was the final day that they had to be able to decide whether or not this was going to be on the ballot in November. It is official. This November, Missourians will be able to vote on whether or not sports wagering will be legalized in the state of Missouri. So huge news in the sports betting community. It is possible that finally Missouri will have sports betting legalized.
We finally got there, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm tired of driving to Illinois.
Yeah, I'm tired of going to a random Denny's parking lot to make my bets for football on Sundays.
It's been a long time coming. So that's the big news in Missouri political conversations.
But when you led with that first one, I was like, oh,
Yeah, seriously, what are we doing,
T-Bone's
man?
face, he goes, what? What?
T-Bone, dump that.
I almost pushed the button here just to fire off the brake.
I got like
Let's
4
go.
hours of sleep last night. T-Bone's like, whoa, BK, where are you going, man?
This guy's getting a little crazy.
You should have seen Mike Ryder's face behind you too, been like panic mode. Like, what is happening right now?
That's Alex. He's T-Bone. I'm BK. The Junk Drawer in 15 minutes. NFL Quick Hitters is next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends over at Rhino Shield. If you're a business owner, listen up, because if your exterior looks worn down, if it looks like you've got the paint chipping off, if it looks old, it needs a new look. And that's where Rhino Shield comes into play. There have been tons of businesses in the area that have called Darren and his team at Rhino Shield. CMC Electric over in Maryville, Illinois. I got pictures from Darren of the work that they did, the befores and afters, and you could extremely tell the difference of how old it looked and how brand new it looks thanks to Rhino Shield's work. But other places as well, Chesterfield Amphitheater, Kempen Automotive in House Springs, Cottleville Smiles, all have called Darren with Rhino Shield because they get that coating of a rhino on the exterior of their building. And Rhino Shield has been featured on HGTVs multiple times. They've got a A+ rating on the Better Business Bureau. What they have is a product that sticks 8 to 10 times thicker than any paint that you're going to buy over the counter or with another company. They use a ceramic coating that is 100% waterproof. It deflects 90% of the UV rays, and it is all backed by a 25-year transferable warranty. So if your business needs a new look, if your house needs a new look, then it's time to call Darren. Have them come out, give you a free estimate, free quote of what their work will be. Get the coating of a rhino on the exterior. 877-25-RHINO. That's 877-25rhino.com.
Terry Herrick's Near Day Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Busy morning for Blues GM Doug Armstrong as he made a pick swap trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins as he reacquired their 2025 second-round pick and then offer sheeted to Edmonton Oilers defenseman Philip Broberg and forward Dylan Holloway. We just had the chance to catch up with our Blues insider Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. If you missed that conversation, you can check it out on the podcast page at 101ESPN.com after the show today. And the Cardinals back in action tonight. 5:40 will be first pitch. Eric Fetty on the mound for St. Louis. Hunter Green will get the start for the Reds. The Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
All right, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters. Are you guys done with this Brandon Ayuk story yet? Because,
So much.
boy, am I finished talking about this Brandon Ayuk story. However, we got to do it again because there's new news on this. According to Ian Rappaport, the Steelers and 49ers have a deal on a potential trade, and Pittsburgh is in a, quote, good place, end quote, on an Ayuk contract. If San Francisco gives the final sign-off, it would be done. San Francisco also has an offer out to Ayuk on a long-term deal for him to stay. He has yet to accept said deal. Didn't we have this exact report like 2 weeks ago? Am I misremembering? What?
Yeah.
Is Brandon Ayuk going to play for the Steelers or the 49ers this year?
I say
I think it's
Steelers.
going to be, I say 49ers. This is just trying to make it like, oh, hey, I want to be wanted. Now I'm wanted. Now give me my money. And he's going to get his money, and he's going to stay with the 40. Who would you rather go to, the 49ers or the Steelers?
I'd rather go who's going to pay me.
I mean, I would rather make a little bit less and play for the 49ers.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Don't mess with Happy, man. I'm in a good place. I've got a good quarterback. There's no better offensive coach to get the best out of me than the guy that has developed me already to this point in my career. I would imagine, and maybe he hates living in California, right?
Oh,
like it's
brutal.
possible.
Pittsburgh's going to be cold.
But yeah, do you really want to go there and
No.
play for that team and have that quarterback situation with no firm timetable on when it's going to get better?
Yeah.
You just saw what their offensive coordinator had down in Atlanta and what he was able to utilize those weapons as. Like Drake London didn't really do a whole lot with that team. And now there's a lot of buzz on him putting up monster numbers this season. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But if you're Brandon Ayuk, is this really the place that you want to go? For me, my answer would be no. I would just rather take, I know it's less, quote unquote. Dude, you're making $30 million either way, most likely. That's life-changing money for your grandchildren, much less for you.
And if I'm Brandon Ayuk and that's what's presented to me, be like, here, Brandon, you're either going to get this money, which is a little bit of a discount than what you're probably worth, but you're staying with us, or you go to Pittsburgh and they'll pay you what you want. If I'm him, I don't want to go play for Pittsburgh. I'm never going to have the ball thrown to me. Justin Fields couldn't even hold on to it in a preseason game. And who knows with Russell Wilson? If I'm Brandon Ayuk, just give me the money that you can afford so that I feel respected, and let me just stay where I can win.
Yeah, if I'm Ayuk, I would want to stay in San Fran because I can still get, to your point, pretty good money. Though, yes, probably less than what you'd want. I can get really good money, and I got a chance to go win a Super Bowl. You know, that sounds like the perfect sweet spot to me. Pittsburgh, I don't know what their quarterback situation is. Justin Fields looked great in his preseason debut with Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson's not a great quarterback. And to your point, Arthur Smith couldn't get his wideouts the ball in Atlanta. Okay, everything seems to point in the direction of let's just stay with San Francisco.
I think it's a better spot. I mean, if you were telling me I can go to Washington, I'd consider that. Maybe he loves playing with Jaden Daniels, played with him at Arizona State together, former teammates. You've got a pretty open wide receiver room. Like, it could be you and, why am I blanking on his name right now, former Terry McLaurin. And you guys are 1-2 tandem. Maybe you think you're going to build something there. Okay. Yeah, I could see the value in doing something like that. Pittsburgh's a different story entirely, man. Like, when he was talking about potentially going to Cleveland or New England, I didn't totally understand either of those. Pittsburgh, I really don't understand either. I don't know, man. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I certainly would not be going in this direction. There is another player that his team has taken a very different tactic when it comes to an extension or a trade. So Hassan Reddick was traded this offseason from the Eagles to the New York Jets. And he immediately requested a new contract extension, right? He wanted new money from the Jets. The Jets said, nah, man. You could play for us or you could not play. That's pretty much your option. Hassan Reddick has come out with a new trade request. And this is the response from Jets general manager Joe Douglas. Quote, "We have informed Hassan that we will not trade him, that he is expected to be here with his teammates, and that he will continue to be fined per the CBA if he does not report. Since the trade discussions back in March, we have been clear, direct, and consistent with our position. Our focus will remain on the guys that we have here as we prepare for the regular season," end quote.
That away. I like it.
That's what the 49ers should have done.
Yep.
That was the way to just say, hey, listen, this was never a question for us. We told him exactly where we stand, and if he wants to play, cool, he can do that with us. If he doesn't want to play, that's fine too. And his contract will just toll over to next season. He's going to be in the exact same position next year that he is right now, and that's his right. If the 49ers were, in my opinion, better at this, I think they should have done the same thing with Brandon Ayuk. I think this is a smart move by the Jets. Play the hardline role, and if Hassan Reddick goes out there and balls out this year, you can get his money next year.
Yeah. I always take into consideration, though, the disgruntled player. I think that does have an impact on teams. I mean, if I'm a general manager, I'm totally using that method. I'll be like, hey, you can complain all you want. We traded for you. You got this contract. You will play on this contract. Otherwise, you don't have to play, and you'll just have to pay us.
Yeah, I'm always going to side with the GMs of, hey, he's on that deal. He's going to play. And if he doesn't want to play, you're right. He can just recur over to next season. I don't understand why the 49ers didn't take this approach with Brandon Ayuk, because he's like a legitimate one of the best at his position. Reddick, he's good. He's a great player, but I don't know if he's like the best at his spot, you know? I love the fact that the Jets took it that way. Now, if you want to be honest about it, did they really communicate this well enough? Probably not. But who cares? You traded for him. You got the asset that you were looking for in the player. Get on the field. Go earn your next contract. You need to play if you're going to earn that. I love the fact that the Jets took this stand.
All right, last thing here for you guys was we go through some NFL quick hitters. Junk drawer coming up on the other side. Question for you that I saw somebody else ask yesterday. I'm going to steal their content. If you had to pick one team this year to go from worst in their division to first in their division, who would you go with? I'll go ahead and say these out loud so that way our audience that's listening right now doesn't have the standings pulled up in front of them, is familiar with the teams that finished in last in their respective divisions last year. Those teams include in the AFC, the New England Patriots, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Tennessee Titans, and the LA Chargers. And in the NFC, the teams that finished last in their division were the Washington Commanders, the Chicago Bears, the Carolina Panthers, and the Arizona Cardinals. Guys, which team is most likely to go last to first in their division? And I think we're all probably going to say the same team, so I will ask you a follow-up question afterwards. But for now, who's your most likely team to go worst to first?
I don't know if we're all going to say the same team, because
Okay.
I think mine might be the Chicago Bears.
Wow, okay.
I think we probably have the same answer then.
I like the
I know
answer.
the
It's
tr-
bold. It's a
I know-
difficult division.
So the first two I thought of were the Bears or the Titans. The Titans will have to deal with the Texans, or the Bears have to deal with the Lions. And I think I would go the Bears with the Lions, because that offense might be dynamic.
Okay, so not the Bengals.
That's who I thought.
Aren't they in the same division as the Chiefs?
No, they're in the Ravens, Browns, and Steelers division.
Oh yeah, well yeah, I'd have the Ravens over the Bengals.
Okay. Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, no doubt about it, just like Bengals off the table for you, not winning that division.
Yeah, I think
like
the Bengals are. I think the Bengals are a playoff team. I don't think the Bengals are a number one in their division team.
It is worth noting Joe Burrow still not throwing like 4 days in a row at practice. It's like 3 days off, 3 days off.
I still just don't know about that team. Like like Burrow is awesome. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not 100% sold on the Bengals right now. I'm more sold, and I know it's preseason, and I know it could go awful. I'm more sold on the Chicago Bears offense and how dynamic they could be.
I like it.
My answer was the Bengals, because I think you get a healthy Joe Burrow, you're going to have a chance to win that division. I'm lower on the Ravens, the Browns, and the Steelers than most people are. But I to his point on like just that team as a whole, they do give off kind of weird vibes. It's the Joe Burrow not throwing. You got one of their wideouts wanting a contract. Their defensive end, Trey Hendrickson, wants a contract. Like, there's some weird vibes going on with that team, but they're the team for me that I would say is to go last to first.
They remind me a little bit of last year's Bills.
Yeah.
Where it's like you go into the season and there's guys that want new contracts. It doesn't feel like everybody's pulling in the same direction. And it's worth noting, last year's Bills won 11 games. Despite being a weird season for them and very clearly the end of the road for the Buffalo Bills, that core group of players, they won 11 games and were pretty damn close to beating the Chiefs in the playoffs and potentially going on to win a Super Bowl. Like, that was in the range of outcomes for them. I think it is also in the range of outcomes for the Bengals. I just trust Joe Burrow. I think he's eventually going to be fully healthy. Famous last words for basically every season of Joe Burrow's career. But I trust him. I think he's going to get back on track. I think that offense is going to be amazing this season. I like the Bengals. That would be my team to win their division after finishing in last season. But I do like the Bears call. I'm going to fall for it, man. Watching this year's Hard Knocks, I can already feel myself falling for what they're selling on Hard Knocks this year.
I watched that one preseason game of Caleb Williams. I'm like, oh, cool. So this guy's going to be a superstar.
I always say, do not compare anybody to Patrick Mahomes because nobody is Patrick Mahomes. But
of course you do. Do you say that to his poster every night before you go to sleep?
I do.
Nobody's you.
Nobody will compare themselves to you, Patrick. Nobody.
Alex has a picture of my face, and he just throws darts. It's a dartboard for him. Yeah.
I have a BB gun. Just
He's got an axe throwing competition in his room.
That's in the backyard.
I actually just have a picture. I have a life-size cutout of Patrick Mahomes that I put next to our bed. Kara finds it to be very strange, but it works for us.
She just doesn't look at it.
The one guy that I think is as close as you can get to Mahomes without being Mahomes is Caleb Williams.
And
the
that
questions,
offense.
The questions that I have about him are more like personality, toughness, how quickly is he going to be able to decipher what he's seeing defensively? Like, those are the things that make Mahomes go from like special player, oh my God, look at all these highlights, to holy crap, he could go down as the best quarterback that we've ever seen. Like playing on a sprained ankle, playing on the knee that's bending sideways, like that stuff, that toughness that comes with Mahomes, the leadership ability, all that stuff, that's what makes him truly special and unique. The other stuff though, man, the skill set, Caleb's kind of got it. Don't say it out loud too loud, but Caleb is a special thrower of the football, dude.
I
that
think
play
Caleb
he made was unreal.
I think he has the opportunity to do what C.J. Stroud did in his first year with the Texans. And I mean, we're talking about that offense that I believe, if they stay healthy, because that's the biggest thing with Keenan Allen, but to have Allen, Odunze, and DJ Moore, like those are three weapons that I can get on board with throwing any day of the week.
They're fun, man. They could be a lot of fun. All right, that's Alex Ferrario. He's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. We're going to dive into the junk drawer coming up next. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Let's dive into the juncture. Alex, South Korea is deploying a sniffer dog at the airport to detect bed bugs after the Paris Olympics, and I think they're doing this all wrong.
I didn't know dogs could sniff out bed bugs. That's
all
incredible.
They need to do, apparently this is a 2-year-old beagle that's going to screen travelers returning to from Paris after the French capital experienced an outbreak of the creatures last year. All they needed to do was call you.
Absolutely.
You're readily available. Alex Ferrario, anytime that we go over to Alton. Now, we trust the place that we stay at. It's fantastic. However, Alex doesn't trust anything when it comes to bed bugs.
I never trust.
Mm-hmm. So he always checks our bed for bed bugs. He put on a video that we put out on Twitter a couple of years ago, I believe it was at this point, where he goes through and shows you exactly what you need to do. You got to check all the corners. I didn't know about this bed bug process prior to staying a night in the same area as Alex Ferrario. But, Alex, they should have just called you. You would have happily gone over there. $100,000. Bet you it's pretty cheap.
I could have been their bed bug consultant for the Olympics. You send me to France for the entirety of it and pay me a certain amount of money, and I'll make sure that not one person there has a bed bug. It's real simple, ladies and gentlemen. All you got to do, first of all, never sleep on the comforter. Anybody who uses the comforter at a hotel is just asking for bed bugs because those bad boys don't get washed. But then you got to take the sheets off. You got to check the seams of the mattress to make sure there's none of those little buggers floating around there. And then the one that everybody forgets, BK, everybody forgets. The headboard always comes off. I'll repeat for those in the back. The headboard always comes off. You lift that bad boy up, you lay it down, no bed bugs, whoop, bada bing, bada boom, we're good to go.
I'm never going to do that.
Same.
There will be exactly 0 times in which I am pulling out that headboard from my hotel.
When you go to Mexico,
it
BK.
It will never happen.
When you go to Mexico, if you get there, because your plane's a little janky and I'm not even sure if you're going to end up there, you're going to come home with bed bugs because you didn't listen to Ferrario. Papa Ferrario's here to help. And if you're not going to listen to Daddy, well, then you're going to get bed bugs.
Never call yourself Daddy ever again in my
Papa Ferrario sounds like a crazy old man.
Always
100%.
call myself Daddy. Well, have you ever seen me check for bed bugs? My wife, Katie, gets so pissed when we go to hotels because prior to us, she used to sleep with, like, the comforter. The first thing I do before I even put my suitcases down is I go to the bed, I grab the comforter, and I just yank it across and throw it in a corner. I'm like, nope, not sleeping with this one.
The reason why they use this 2-year-old beagle is because it is the only dog in the country that is specifically trained for bed bugs. There's one dog in all of South Korea, and they call him in apparently. Are like, hey, Seiko, let's go.
No,
that's his name, Seiko.
There's 2 dogs, BK. There's 2 dogs. Right here. Woof, woof, baby. Woof,
I was going to say, he is also able to check for the bed bugs in a hotel room in under 2 minutes. I think we need to get him on the phone.
Do it faster. I can do it faster. I can check it in under 2 minutes. I can do it faster.
I think we need to get them on the phone, have Seiko come over to St. Louis, Missouri from South Korea to go one-on-one against Alex Ferrario, and this will be our Olympic competition of Alex going for the gold against Seiko to find out who truly can seek out the bed bugs quicker, Alex or Seiko.
That dog ain't got nothing on me. That dog ain't got nothing. 2 minutes is a waste of time. I could find a bed bug in 45 seconds.
He's Alex, that's T-Bone, I'm BK. In 15 minutes, we'll play a game of Better to Forget It. But coming up next, what do these moves mean for the Blues' current defensive core? And does it tell us anything about the Blues' forward group? We'll talk about it next here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK, and it's time to unlock your inner champion. Are you feeling a little groggy? You wake up in the morning, you think to yourself, man, I did not sleep well last night despite getting 8 full hours. Well, it could be due to low testosterone. It could be due to some micronutrients that you don't have at the levels that you should be expected to. Victory Men's Health can help you out with that. VictoryMen'sHealth.com is the place to go to book an appointment right now. You can also check them out at their 4 great locations across the St. Louis area. That is exactly what I did, and I feel better than I ever have before. Went in there and found out that I have some vitamin deficiencies. Went in there, checked out my micronutrient levels as well. They can do that for you. It's been a huge boost to my everyday vitality. I feel better. I wake up in the morning feeling more refreshed. Even when Luca wakes up overnight, I wake up in the morning, I take my vitamins that they got for me. I feel better on a day in, day out basis. I have better brain activity. I have more excitement, more energy. They can do the same thing for you. It's Victory Men's Health. Check them out. 4 great locations across the St. Louis area. They will help you unlock your inner champion at VictoryMen'sHealth.com. All right, so the Blues made a couple of moves earlier today. One was to trade for their own picks, and it was like, whoa, why'd they do that? And then we found out like 20, 30 minutes later why they would go about getting their own pick next year. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Doug Armstrong woke up feeling a little frisky this morning.
Yeah, baby.
Because he decided, you know what, we're going to offer sheet a couple of players. The Edmonton Oilers have no money to work with. They're broke. And they were like me as a 25-year-old trying to make $25,000 a year, trying to figure out what to do now that you got to get on health insurance. It wasn't a good situation for anybody. It was like, okay, so I can either buy lunch or pay for my health insurance. I guess I'll pay for lunch. The health insurance.
No, lunch.
Alex, the Edmonton Oilers don't really have a way to bring both of these guys back as currently constructed. It's Holloway, it's Broberg. One's a defenseman, the other is a forward. Very talented young players. They're the types of guys that you would love to keep within your organization if you're Edmonton. Unfortunately for them, I don't really necessarily have that choice. They can probably bring back one. They can probably make it work with one because of the LTIR situation with Evander Kane. Unlikely they'll be able to bring back both. Let's start out with this. Who do you think is more likely to end up as a St. Louis Blue, the forward or the defenseman in your mind?
I would say the defenseman because that's a lot of money to pay for a guy who's going to be playing third-line minutes because They might love Philip Broberg. I mean, I've seen multiple people on social media. EJ Radick has said it. A couple of guys at TSN had said, like, look, Edmonton really liked what Broberg showed in the playoffs. But he's not going to play more than Evan Bouchard, and he's not going to play more than Matthias Ekholm. Like, those two guys are your top 4 defensemen on the left side, and Broberg's on the third pair. It's what he's lived for these last couple of years. I think if you're looking at it from the Edmonton perspective, you'd probably rather keep the 22-year-old defenseman who was an 8th overall pick in hopes that he can get that potential and get rid of the forward who, yes, he's 22 years old, but he was on the 4th line and there's not much to showcase it. But if I were a betting man, which of course I am, the Circa Sports Illinois app is where we do it all, I would say Broberg will be a Blue because $2 million is easy to handle if you're Edmonton rather than $4 million because every penny is going to be important to the Oilers when you have to give Bouchard a new contract, Draisaitl a new contract, McDavid a new contract. It doesn't matter if you put Evander Kane on LTIR. He will have to come back at some point. He can't sit on there for 82 games this season until the postseason. So that's where I think they're going to go more the Holloway than the Broberg. But I could realistically see a scenario where they say, you know what? Bleep these players. Let's take the picks because the Blues might be bad again this year, and we might get the 2nd and 3rd round draft picks, and that might be a top 15 pick in those rounds.
So that's the other thing that I find to be really interesting here, Alex, is like, you look at Dylan Holloway, man, the guy played 38 games for them last year and scored 9 points. So like he's a really nice addition for the Blues. This is a player that was previously a 14th overall selection in the 2020 draft, and there was real reason for optimism about what he could be for you here in St. Louis. But if you're Edmonton, hey, man, we're contender right now. I'm trying to win a Stanley Cup. Is Holloway the type of player that's really going to get me over the top right now? The answer is probably no. Could a 3rd-round pick, though, be useful for us at the trade deadline, for example, if we decide, hey, we need to go get something or we need to retain salary somewhere, something like that? Like, a 3rd-round pick could be potentially more useful or as useful for them this season as a Dylan Holloway. For the Blues, it's the opposite. I'd rather have the player than the pick because the 3rd-round pick 4 years from now, the hope is he becomes Dylan Holloway. So you're avoiding that 4 years of potential development and getting a player that is ready-made to come in and potentially help you right now.
And that's a phenomenal point, BK, because...
Thanks, man. I have them occasionally. Rarely, but occasionally.
Sometimes you do. Mr. Right, Mr. Wrong here on BK and Ferrario. You are in win now mode because not only do you just need to win now, but you need to convince Draisaitl and McDavid that you need to stay here. And I've seen a couple of people bring up on the text line that, oh, well, they can get both because all they need to do is put Kane on LTIR and then waive a Cody Ceci or a Brett Kulak. The problem is those two guys are more established in the NHL and make more sense as a third-pair defenseman because they're defensive-minded than a Philip Broberg. And if you're trying to win a Stanley Cup next season, paying a Dylan Holloway $2 million to play on your 4th line and paying Philip Broberg to play on your 3rd pair as $4 million player, that doesn't make you a better team. If Edmonton wants to win now, you're right. I need a 2nd and 3rd round draft pick that could go to another contender that gets me a player that plays into my top 6, my top 4, or I use those in the draft this upcoming year. Guess what? In their minds in Edmonton, Broberg and Holloway might not have gotten to the potential that they thought because it's not like they were just drafted. Both have been in the AHL for multiple years and have never gotten the NHL opportunity. You could go get a 2nd-round pick, a 3rd-round pick in this upcoming year's draft, and if the Blues are a fringe playoff team, they're talking top 16 pick in the 2nd and 3rd round. So I don't know if Edmonton goes after either of these guys because they're more focused on winning a cup now than worried about what the future is going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The Broberg side of things is what I just don't know about because he showed so much in the postseason last year that if I'm Edmonton, I probably want to keep that guy around, man. Like, I can make up for not having Holloway, who last year had 9 points for me. I don't know. I understand they have some defensive depth, but defense has been a problem for Edmonton over the years. And not having a 23-year-old former 8th overall selection from the 2019 draft, it feels like hustling backwards. Because once that guy walks out the door, I'm now looking for that player again. I would want to. That would be the one that if I'm in Edmonton's shoes and I can decide I'm retaining one of these players, who am I bringing back? For me, it would be Broberg. I'm not letting that guy walk out the door.
But see, Broberg and Bouchard to me are very similar players, kind of like what Perunovic and Krug are. No, not well. Yes, good, but they're both guys that have offensive upside. They're big bodies that are okay on defense. Like It's kind of the same situation as Krug and Perunovic here in St. Louis. Like, we're talking about Perunovic and how Krug's expendable if Perunovic is going to play.
There's a key difference here in that their players are good.
Maybe. I mean, Broberg, like, he was good in the playoffs. Like, he has not shown them potential in the regular season. Now, I'm not shooting down Broberg. I like Broberg. But what I'm saying is,
what I was going to say is it feels like a good time to show that you're good.
Well, very true. Very true. But, like, if you're going, like, just framing this roster, if you're Edmonton, you need different personalities. And I don't know if they could get away with Broberg and Bouchard as your top 4 defensemen. You need a Matthias Ekholm. You need a Brett Kulak. You need a Cody Ceci. And this just might me trying to convince myself that they're actually going to not re-sign Broberg. But Broberg and Bouchard are so similar. And since Bouchard overtook that spot by Broberg, because Bouchard was drafted after Philip Broberg, I think they'll view that as, we've already got our Philip Broberg. It was great to have him, but we need $4 million to use in other areas by the trade deadline. Let's not worry about that. Let's get the depth forward, because guess what? Forwards go down a lot, and you need somebody to fill in the top 6, top 9. This guy was playing on a line with Leon Draisaitl in the playoffs and scored 5 goals in the postseason run. So I think if I'm Edmonton, I'm looking more at this as like, let's keep the forward, who's only going to cost me $2 million, and let's move on from the defenseman, because we're set on defense right now.
And it's funny because, like, I would say the defenseman, because I view young defensemen like young pitching in baseball. And the other thing is kind of like with pitching, it takes so long for them to develop. I mean, last year was, I think, 2 of the last 3 years is like the first time you saw Parayko kind of go, okay, that's the number 1 defenseman the Blues need. He's probably not like viewed as number 1 across the league, but he's a guy that can play on the top pair, because he's like 30 when we got to that point. And Broberg's 23, if I remember correctly. If I'm the Oilers, I'm saying, you know what? I would view the defenseman situation. I understand what you're saying about the flexibility it provides to them. If I'm Edmonton, I would say, you know what, these guys are a hot commodity. It's hard to find them, as to PK's point, as you're chasing to find them. I would match the offer sheet with him, let the forward walk, and I would say, you know what, we'll figure out the cap situation when we get there.
I just don't know if they're going to be able to do $4 million, because it's not just this year. Like, and I know you can just figure it out in the offseason. Yeah, but
if it was like a 4-year deal, I'd totally agree with you. But for the fact that it's only a 2-year contract, I think they could probably make it work. Could be wrong, though.
I don't know, man. I think they're going to be more focused on the salary in different places, but I could be wrong with all of this. Like I said, I could just be convincing myself that it's going to work out for the Blues, because this is what they absolutely need, is a big defenseman on the left side that can play in your top 4. But Edmonton has so many other future issues right now that I don't know if I need a 22-year-old defenseman making that more of a problem for us, because that's not just $4 million now, it's $4 million next year when you need to re-sign Leon Draisaitl.
So the other thing that I did want to ask you about, Alex, and we'll get out of here on this, we'll get to Bet It or Forget It on the other side. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. What does it mean for the Blues? Like, let's say they get both. Stop right under that assumption right now, because
I like it.
Edmonton does not have their second-round pick or their first-round pick next year. So they don't have a lot to utilize at this year's trade deadline if they wanted to give up resources then. If they decided to move on from these 2 players, they could get a second and third-round pick that they could then use at the deadline, for example. If the Blues were to acquire them, what does that mean for the current prospects that were previously anticipated to be a part of this team? Does that mean that they're just, like, not even going to have Perunovic on the roster anymore? Does that mean that Bolduc is now just expected to start at the AHL level? What does that mean for some of these younger players that previously we had anticipated, hey, maybe this is the year that they get some legitimate playing time?
You remember that comment from Doug Armstrong when he talked about the internal competition during the prospect camp, of how important that was, and they're going to have a lot of it. And I think that just bolsters that even more. Like, let's start on defense. The guys that I can assure you are going to be here are Parayko, Leddy, Falk, and Ryan Suter. Beyond that, if Broberg's on this team, Broberg's playing in your top 4. No question about it. And I think Matt Kessel is as well. I just listed off the 6 defensemen for you. I think Broberg signing basically tells you won't see Torrey Krug again as a St. Louis Blue in terms of the injury and depending on what happens next offseason. I also think that puts Scott Perunovic in the minor leagues, because as a 7th defenseman, you need a guy who's versatile, somebody who could be big, play defense, play offense. And to me, that's more Pierre-Olivier Joseph than it is Scott Perunovic. Now, they might have different ideas on that. Maybe you're worried you lose him through waivers. But I don't know if Scott Perunovic or Tyler Tucker are on this team if Broberg gets the contract and the Oilers don't match it. And in terms of the offense, man, that's going to be the most fascinating one because you have internal competition basically from the second line down. I mean, you're talking centermen, whether it's Dvorsky or Pavel Buchnevich or Braden Shen. Now you're talking a left winger who Brandon Saad might not be playing on your second line. Dylan Holloway might be playing on your second line. And I don't know about Bolduc and Dvorsky. They would have to outplay guys like Texier, guys like Matthew Joseph, guys like Dylan Holloway just to make it on this roster. So I think the forward group is going to be the part that really impacts the internal competition.
He's Alex. That's T-Bone on BK. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. We got Bet It or Forget It coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends over at Classic Air Care, making people comfortable since 1926. And when it comes to Classic Air Care, they've taken care of my HVAC system since 2016. They've taken care of my dad's HVAC system since he purchased his house back in like 1992. So they have always been there for my family when it comes to maintaining the old HVAC system and when they've purchased a new one. My dad purchased one, calling Classic Air Care to come out. And here's the thing that Classic Air Care is talking about, because if you're in the market of buying a new HVAC system, now is the best time to do it because there's government regulations on the refrigerant that these old units are using. And when these new units come into play, and I believe it's around January, they're going to be using different types of refrigerants that are going to be 15 to 20% more costly than what they are right now. So if you're in the market, if you've got an old HVAC system, if you're thinking you need an update, or maybe it's about to go out in the middle of this summer, then it's time to call Classic Air Care. Have them come out. They'll do the free estimate. Check out the maintenance program that they have. It is super beneficial for you and your family year-round. Call them or check them out online. Tell them Alex Ferrario sent you at Classic Air Care or ClassicAirCare.com.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. You give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are betting it or forgetting it here on 101 ESPN. Boys, bet it or forget it. The Cardinals will win the next 2 games, giving you optimism heading into this significant stretch of games against contenders with the Dodgers, Brewers, Twins, Padres, Yankees, Brewers, and Mariners looming. Bet it or forget it. They win their next 2 games against Cincinnati with Fetty and Kyle Gibson on the mound.
I'm forgetting it, not because I don't believe they could win the next 2 games, because I think they probably could. It's Cincinnati. I'm forgetting it because they could blow out the Cincinnati Reds the next 2 games and hit 10 home runs in each game, and I will have zero optimism for the stretch that is upcoming for the Cardinals.
I'm going to forget it. I don't think they're going to win the next 2.
Sweep it.
I think Fetty's probably going to get the loss tonight, and then we'll see about Kyle Gibson.
BK is totally taking off that conductor hat soon.
Join us when we light it on fire.
What have they done to give you a whole lot of excitement? Basically, since the Chicago series, it's been a big old thud. They went to Chicago. They played that first game where Helsley got lit on fire. And then since then, they've been running around like a chicken with their head cut off, and there's been nothing to suggest that they're going to get this thing back on track. And that's against Chicago, New York, Tampa, and now Cincinnati. I'm supposed to believe that that's going to get better against the Dodgers or the Brewers or the Twins or the Yankees or the Padres. Like, I don't feel that way at all. So, I don't believe they're going to win their next 2, and I do not have confidence going into this extended run against contenders. Alex, what do you have for us today?
Guys, bet it or forget it. If the Blues do get Philip Broberg, we will not see Scott Perunovich again as a St. Louis Blue.
Bet it. I think that might have been the case either way. He was going to have a good camp to be able to jump over some of the players that they brought in. They brought those guys in for a reason. And it wasn't because they had the utmost confidence in what Scott Perunovich was going to add to the room. So I'm going to bet it. I think that we have seen potentially the end of Perunovich, depending on what happens with this Broberg situation.
I think I will bet it as well. I don't think he'll be in the press box. I think I'm kind of with you, Alex, what you said last segment. I think he's probably going to end up in the minor leagues if he doesn't have a great camp. So I'll say bet it. I don't think you're going to see Scott Perunovich again.
The one thing that I'm betting this, by the way, the one thing I am curious about is if they do pull this off and they get both Holloway and Broberg and you lose your 2nd and 3rd round pick, do you trade Scott Perunovich to another team to get like a 5th or a 6th round pick, just so you can get an asset rather than lose him if he goes through waivers?
I don't know who's trading for him, but sure, if that's available.
I would imagine somebody is going to say for a 6th round pick, we'll take a flyer on him as a depth piece.
Guys, bet it or forget it. We will see the Cardinals move on from Nolan Arenado and one of the left-handed bats this offseason.
Man, I don't know that they're going to do it. I'll say forget it because I just don't see this ownership group deciding to move on from a future Hall of Famer. And that's what you'd be doing if you trade Nolan Arenado this offseason. That being said, I think this is the offseason. If things do not get turned around, if they do end this season missing the playoffs once again, this is the offseason where you should probably go full youth movement. That doesn't mean tank. I don't think this team is in position to tank because I think they have too many good young players. They're at the end of what a tank would build, right? You've built up your farm system. Now this is what they have to offer you. In my opinion, what you should be looking to do now is let's see what the young guys can do. Let's see what they become. And let's find out next year what they're capable of. And then we'll fill in the holes after finding out who emerged and who fell to the side. I would do it. That means trading potentially Nolan Arenado. It means letting Paul Goldschmidt walk. It means trading one of the left-handed bats, probably a Nootbaar or Gorman. It means looking to see if there's any availability or teams that would take on Miles Michaelis or Steven Matz. I'm looking at all that stuff. Will the Cardinals do that? No. That's why I'm forgetting it.
I'm forgetting it as well. I do think one of Gorman or Nootbaar is traded this offseason. Nolan Arenado's not going anywhere. He gets to pick where he wants to go, and it's basically the Dodgers, and they don't want to bring him in. So I think you've got Nolan Arenado until he's done as a Cardinal.
Yeah, I would forget it as well. I don't know if they would move on from Arenado, and I don't know if the places that would take Arenado or where Arenado would want to be, which, by the way, how funny would it be if Arenado blocks a trade to get out of St. Louis, and Krug blocks a trade to get out of St. Louis. Two guys that love St. Louis, so we've been trying to get rid of. Unbelievable.
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Your Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. You give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are betting it or forgetting it, courtesy of Circus Sports in Illinois here on 101 ESPN. Bet It or Forget It, the marketing of 101 ESPN almost had a full-blown panic attack when it sounded like BK was going to start talking about politics on the air.
Yeah,
that absolutely happened.
Marketing. Everybody in this building started panicking.
I panicked, and I was in the room.
Yeah, I panicked, and I'm at my house.
Bet it or forget it, guys. Luken Baker will be a bench bat or a platoon DH option for the Cardinals next season.
Forget
Forget it. Like, the articles of, like, Luken Baker's tearing it up in the minor leagues. He deserves another shot with the Cardinals. Like, it's Patrick Wisdom 2.0. That's what this is. They tried it. It didn't work at the majors. He's tearing it up in the... Sometimes guys are just AAA players.
Or they become Patrick Wisdom or Juan Yepes or Lane Thomas. And the thing that is difficult about those kinds of players is they can have roles in Major League Baseball. But I don't know what that role is specifically with this team if they're going to continue carrying a guy like Brandon Crawford on the roster.
Well,
that would have to be the move. If they were going to go out there and bring up one of their right-handed bats from AAA, they would very likely have to DFA Brandon Crawford, and the Cardinals aren't willing to do that right now. And for next season, I think it's probably more likely, and I don't know, more likely to happen is tomorrow. I think it's more likely he is not on the 40-man next year than it is that he's on the 26-man next year.
I'd agree with that. And it's also just the rot. Like, you have to have Pedro Pajes in the lineup for his defense behind the plate, which doesn't really seem to be making a difference. Like, there's a spot that a Luken Baker could benefit if you use a DH in certain situations. But the Cardinals refuse to do it because they have to have two different catchers in games.
And I don't think he'll be here. And like last year, it's unlike he hasn't had an opportunity. He got an okay runway last year. He had about 100 plate appearances. And just watching him at 100 plate appearances, it was, okay, he looks overmatched. Not sure he's really a big leader. Like, they tried it at least last year.
A little bit of news to pass along from the LA Angels. They have claimed Nick Robertson off of waivers from the Cardinals. The Cardinals DFA'd him when they activated, I believe it was Riley O'Brien. Nick Robertson, if you don't remember, was one of two pitchers that were acquired by the Cardinals when they traded Tyler O'Neill to the Boston Red Sox. It was Nick Robertson and Victor Santos, I believe it is.
Lost
who has
the trade.
a 6 ERA right now down in AAA and has lost his spot in the rotation multiple times already this season. Nick Robertson was DFA'd recently, now is going to be an Angel. So you essentially have nothing to show for your trade. Tyler O'Neill going to Boston, and if we're being totally honest, you don't have a whole lot to show for your trade for Dylan Carlson either. Sean Armstrong is not.
You know, last night.
He's fine.
Yeah.
He's going to be gone after the season.
Whoa.
Bet it or forget it. Those will both go down as failed trades for the Cardinals.
Bet it. I think at some point in their careers, both will be an all-star again.
I won't go that far. I don't think Carlson will be an all-star. O'Neill looks great when he's healthy. I'll bet it. I think it's an unfair bet it, but I will bet it. I mean, that's what you're going to get when you had guys that have kind of lost their trade value. It's just kind of shot in the darks, and you missed on two of them and looking like you missed on the third with Armstrong.
Yeah, to me,
But by no means do I say that I'm upset about those trades either.
Yeah.
the failure is not trading them earlier. It was waiting too long. I
absolutely.
I didn't blame them for doing that with Tyler O'Neill. I thought the Dylan Carlson thing, we had all seen the writing on the wall there. Like it wasn't working here in St. Louis, and eventually you have to cash in those chips, and that is why we talk about the left-handed bats. This is the offseason to cash those in, where there's still there's room to believe in a lot of those left-handed bats, and they still have club control remaining for multiple seasons. The old way of the Cardinals operating would be betting on it again next year and seeing, okay, can it work for us? A lot of other organizations would say, not worth it. Let's go ahead and cash out now. We know our talent better than anybody else does. We'll see if that's what the Cardinals decide to do there. With Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. There is one move that the Cardinals could make, similar to what just happened with Nick Robertson being plucked off of waivers by the Angels. Should the Cardinals do it? We'll talk about that next here on 101 ESPN.
Imagine your hot wife is at home. You pull up to the house and see a strange truck in the driveway. You enter the front door like you own the place. Because, well, you do own the
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friend and insurance agent, Tracy Bibb, taking care of you and your family with your car, with your home insurance. Allstate, her and her team, they've got some of the most competitive rates. And the one thing that I think is so important is that personal attention you get from Tracy Bibb. A lot of people don't even know their insurance agent. I've talked to their insurance agent. Tracy Bibb is always in contact with you. So you need to get with her on the insurance side of things. But right now, she's in the middle of the Quote for Cause. She's teamed up with the Rizzuto Show over at The Point. As if you give Tracy a call today, just get a free non-committal quote. They will donate in your name towards this Quote for the Cause, which is benefiting prostate cancer awareness, of course, with Jeff Burton over at The Point with the Riz Show. So make sure you give her a call today. Just check on that free non-committal quote. Super simple. All you got to do, 314-328-4260. Again, that's 314-328-4260. Tell Tracy Alex Ferrario sent you and get with the best. That is Tracy Bibb. 314-328-4260. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bibb.
Terry Hendricks, Near Day Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Blues made a trade today as they acquired their 2025 second-round pick back from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they offer sheet to Edmonton Oilers as they offer sheeted Philip Broberg, a defenseman, and Dylan Holloway, a forward from Edmonton. The Edmonton Oilers have 7 days to match that offer sheet, or those players will become Blues. And if you missed our interview with our Blues insider, Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic, you can check it out on our podcast page at 101ESPN.com. And the Cardinals back in action tonight as it's game 2 of their 3-game set at the Cincinnati Reds. 5:40 will be first pitch. Eric Fetty will get the start for St. Louis. Hunter Green will be on the mound for the Reds. This Sports Update is brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service tax line. At the end of this segment, we're going to give you a chance to win a 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash game for the Cardinals versus the Brewers. It includes a limited edition Woody Williams bobblehead. And so at the end of this segment, have that text line ready to go. If you're texture number 101 with the correct answer to the trivia question, we will be giving you that 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash game. All right, right now, though, Alex, there's a bit of news from the LA Dodgers. I was legitimately surprised by this. They placed Amed Rosario on waivers because they ended up bringing somebody back up to their big league clubs. They had to make a move. Amed Rosario is the guy that they decided to place through waivers. Now, if you're wondering, didn't they just acquire him? The answer is yes. They did indeed acquire him at the trade deadline this year. And he's been pretty good. This year he's batting .305, doesn't have a ton of power. He was only at 2 home runs, but he capably can play shortstop for you, can play kind of all over the diamond, honestly. He does a little bit of the Tommy Edman stuff, and he does so by hitting right-handed, which is noteworthy for the Cardinals, who don't have a lot of right-handed batters. Alex, would you consider claiming Amed Rosario if you're in the Cardinals' position right now? Not like he has a massive contract. It was a 1-year deal worth $1.5 million. He can essentially fill the Brandon Crawford role, but doing so in a better way. And he does so at just 28 years old from the right side. You might even bring him back next year. Is this a player you would be interested in bringing in?
Absolutely. Because essentially, now the Cardinals won't, but essentially what you're doing is you're DFAing Brandon Crawford, and Amed Rosario is taking over Brandon Crawford's spot. He's a right-handed bat. You're getting rid of a left-handed bat. Great. He can play shortstop if you absolutely need him to. There's those 4 games that we talked about that Mason Wynn's not playing down the stretch. But more than anything, it's another bench bat that you can weaponize if you need to late in games. And, oh, by the way, I just pulled this up, BK, because you know me with the RISPCT, find out what it means to me. In 4 at-bats for the Dodgers, Amed Rosario has 2 hits and 2 RBIs with runners in scoring position. So, like,
4 at-bats, baby. That's what I'm making my
4 at-bats. I'll take the clutchness in that situation. I don't see what the harm in this would be. You're bolstering up your bench and taking out a guy that barely plays for you.
Yeah, in the last 4 years, here's what he's done OPS plus wise against against lefties, which the Cardinals have struggled mightily against, including last night. 128, 122, 107, 126. It's like a 25% above league average hitter against the handedness of pitcher that you struggle with the most. Dude, he's just starting at second base for me. Like, that's what I would do. I would say this dude is my starting second baseman against left-handed pitching. He is coming off of the bench when I'm facing against right-handed pitchers. He will play much more often than what you currently have in that role for Brandon Crawford. I see very little downside here. The money is essentially even with what you're paying for Brandon Crawford, so it's not like you're adding a bunch of extra money to your books for this season. I think this is an obvious one. The Cardinals are of the contenders right up at or near the top of the list of teams that would be able to claim Amed Rosario. Now, if he was under club control for multiple seasons, maybe you'd get a non-contender that says, we'll go ahead and take him. He's a legitimate big leaguer. Why not go ahead and put a claim for him? But because he's on a 1-year deal, most of those teams probably won't. There's no reason to add that kind of salary. I think the Cardinals should do this. Like, this feels like I can't imagine a better, I think they should have traded for him, and now he's just available for nothing.
BK, do you have those numbers in front of you of the Cardinals' extra base hits with runners in scoring position this season?
I can grab them for you, yeah.
Because I just pulled up his numbers in Tampa Bay before he was a Dodger because, you didn't like those 4 at-bats. He's got 8 extra base hits with runners in scoring position with the Tampa Bay Rays. 8 extra base hits.
I've got their home runs. They have 3 home runs with runners in scoring position in the last month. They do not have one in the month of August. So I'd have to look up specifically what they've done. It's not significant. I mean, they're 11 for 79 with runners in scoring position in the month of August. One of those was a home run. So they've done nothing with runners in scoring position. He can help them.
I mean, Brandon Crawford provides nothing to this team.
He's their DJ. He plays music after the games.
Well, I guarantee you Amed Rosario
if he doesn't get a big league job,
music.
he can still do that in the locker room,
Yeah. Somebody's got a wedding coming up that he could DJ for him.
And I think this is the most important part of the selling point, if you want to call it that, from our show to the Cardinals. The Cardinals continue to operate on, the worst-case scenario rather than thinking of, how can we maximize our roster. It's the main reason Crawford's still here. So their argument would be, well, if Wynn got hurt, why are we keeping Brandon Crawford? Well, Brandon Crawford can play shortstop at a big league level. Well, you know who could do it better
Rosario.
if Mason Wynn happened to get hurt? Amed Rosario. He's a better shortstop, a better hitter. Defensive metrics tell you he's better at the position defensively than what Brandon Crawford's been this year. It's a win-win, and
I don't
he
see the
hits lefties
downside
well.
here. I actually can't understand why they wouldn't place a claim.
A
He's played this year.
roster spot. That's the downside, BK.
He's played this year at second, third, shortstop, right field, has been a designated hitter 11 times and has been fine. He hits 295 in that regard, but has no power, whatever, and has been a pinch hitter in 10 at-bats so far this year. He's 6 for 10 when coming into a game as a pinch hitter, which is a legitimate skill. Very few guys are good at coming in cold as a pinch hitter late in a game. So he could be somebody that if you bring in a lefty reliever after starting a righty in that game, hey, I can bring in Rosario. And the nice thing with him is he could come in for Nolan Gorman. He could come in for Alec Burleson. He could come in for Lars Nootbaar. Whoever the guy is that's a lefty that's coming up in that spot that struggles against left-handed pitching, he can come in for him because he can play that position capably. Because you can play in your corner outfield or at second or at short or at third for you.
You could go to Brandon Crawford and just say, like, hey, man, is your back hurting a little bit? Like, is your shoulder a little tweaked just a little bit? Because you can still be the DJ. You can still be around. Just your back hurts.
I really think this is the exact kind of move that this team needs. Like, they kind of fell into what would be a perfect addition. Like, this would have been a really nice deadline addition for them, in addition to Tommy Pham, right-handed bat, comes in, helps you against lefties, can play all over the diamond. The Dodgers ended up
Get him for free.
Yeah, like you get you're giving up nothing.
And
here.
he provides some
We
speed
said
as
this-
well. He's I'm shocked by this. He's 93rd percentile in sprint speed.
What are the Dodgers? I actually don't understand why the Dodgers are DFAing.
Well, they got Tommy Edman.
I guess.
They got Tommy
He
Edman.
doesn't have a
But-
wrist.
See, the problem is the Cardinals had this opportunity last year with Ronaldo Lopez, and they basically said, no, we don't need it. I don't think they're not going to do anything. They've got their roster in place. This is the roster that the Cardinals are going to win with, and there's no being creative. Remember the conversation about being creative about Chris Sale in the offseason?
This isn't
in
even
season.
like there's no creativity to this. It's
This
just
is
Yeah,
easy.
because you got a DFA Crawford.
That's not
That's
creativity.
creative
This would be an easy move. You know, it would
for
be,
us.
It's an easy move for any organization, any contender, if they want to
Not
call
the
themselves
Cardinals.
that.
last year, was it the Reds that loaded, or the Guardians? It was the Guardians that loaded
Yeah.
up on all of the guys that were DFA'd by the Angels, and the Guardians weren't a great team at that point. They were just like, hey, let's go ahead, let's see what it looks like. So they added a bunch of these guys. The Cardinals are literally in that position this year. They're 15th right now, if I'm not mistaken, in the waiver claim process currently. So the only teams that have any chance of really being like a legitimate contender this year that would be ahead of them, Pittsburgh, if you still want to include them, but they've really fallen out of this thing, man. Tampa Bay, who had him previously, I don't think they're going to claim him again. So it's basically San Francisco or St. Louis as the teams that would be most likely to pick him up. And I don't know specifically how these waiver claims work in terms of when he will be processed through them, but it's possible, like, if San Francisco wins tonight and the Cardinals lose, the Cardinals would then pick ahead of San Francisco in the waiver claim process. It'll just depend on when that takes place. I would do it. In fact, if I think this is the exact kind of move that the Cardinals needed, and it fell into their laps. It's a smart thing to do. We'll see if they decide to do it. I do wonder if money potentially would be an issue in this regard. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text
Money
line.
out, baby.
If you are texter number 101 and you can tell us what the dog in San Francisco was, or excuse me, the dog in South Korea was being asked to do, Alex certainly is a bit of an expert on it. If you could tell us what he was checking for, the
bit.
dog in the South Korea airport, what is he checking for? If you're texter number 101 with the correct answer, you are getting that 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash game for Cardinals versus Brewers. Coming up next, we're going to hit the rewind for you and give you our final thoughts on the big moves that the Blues made earlier today here on 101 ESPN. Hey, if you missed anything from today's show, be sure to check out the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
All right, Alex, I'm going to open this thing up for you. The Blues earlier today made two significant moves. The first was getting their second-round pick for next year back. They needed that to make the second move, which was putting in a offer sheet for two Edmonton Oilers, one Broberg, the other Holloway. What did you make of the moves when you woke up earlier today and you saw that this was what was happening with the Blues?
I made that Doug Armstrong's a man of his word. He has said multiple times that, if they can upgrade this team, they're looking at doing so to future-wise and this season-wise, but he's also said their hope is to get out of this retool faster. And I think the two offer sheets that they put out there for these Edmonton Oilers players, in my opinion, if they come through, make them better for the now and for the future, because you've got a defenseman who's got top four potential, who's 22 years old, and you've got a forward who has basically been a fourth liner who could be somebody that grows into a top nine role. You're adding more weapons to a group of players that hopes to get back to the playoff conversation, but exit out of this retool and start competing within a couple of years. And bringing in two 22-year-olds for a second and third round draft pick, if the compensation goes that way, that makes this Blues team better, in my opinion.
I'm excited about the possibility of adding a former first-round pick that you essentially avoid multiple years of the development process to this roster, and in return, you give up a second or a third-round pick. Like that, that is just smart business by Doug Armstrong. It's a good way to operate. And whether they get one of these players or both of these players, or even if they get neither of them, it's a good move, man. And it shows Blues fans a good faith that Army's going to do the things that are necessary to try to get this thing back into contention. I don't think adding either of these players or both of them would change my view significantly of the team in 2024. I think they'd be roughly the same. What it does change for me potentially is the outlook for them in the future. Because if you end up getting these guys in here, one or both, and they become, for Broberg, for example, top four defenseman. Well, that was like the biggest long-term hold that this team had. And now you've got somebody that is 23 years old with size, speed, can skate, can potentially help you out offensively from the blue line as well. That's everything they've been lacking and then some. And if they bring in a winger that is 22 years old and has some upside to be a 15 to 20 goal scorer, well, now that takes off some more pressure from some of the other young guys that you were expecting to have that exact role for you this year. So it's just yet another roll of the dice by Doug Armstrong. He's trying to find, okay, if I've got 10 players that are young, can I get 5 of them that work out long term? And if the answer is yes to that, I'm going to be in a pretty good spot when Alex Steen ends up taking over as the general manager for this team. So I thought it was really smart. I liked the moves for the Blues. I think it's something that they had to do, and I'm glad that they decided to do it. For Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, we got the Fast Lane from 2 to 6 right here on 101 ESPN.